Hey swamp folk, I'm all cuddled up here with a blanket, I've got some coffee, and we're about to cover some downright strange, terrifying, and just disturbing true crime horror stories that YouTubers committed themselves. Now, every story we're going to be sharing today came from my second channel podcast, The Dark Side of YouTube, which is hosted by my good friend and very talented voice actor, Autumn Ivy. She will also be voicing most of the stories you're going to hear today, and I really hope you enjoy them. Now, I know it's not me narrating, and a lot of you guys might be upset by that, but you can find plenty of content with my voice on my second channel as well as obviously on Swamp Dweller. We have brand new videos almost every single day. If you're new, be sure to slap that like button like it just slapped Yogi Bear, and you cannot take that disrespect. Subscribe if you're new, and get ready for some creepy and downright terrifying true crime horror stories committed by YouTubers, just like myself.
The internet is a vast and seemingly never-ending space, a valuable tool for anyone who dares to use it. With great power comes great responsibility. Though, and time again, we see history repeat itself in the worst of ways. Among the many corners of the internet, communities have risen and made their home. YouTube is perhaps the most significant pillar of all of these communities, a place where nearly everyone has the opportunity to create and share online content with millions across the globe. With hundreds of thousands of hours of content uploaded nearly every minute, there is virtually no one around who doesn't spend at least some time on YouTube. The eclectic group of entertainers who make YouTube content is affectionately known as YouTubers. Generally, YouTubers are seen as fun-loving entertainers with a passion for a specific niche in content. Many look up to these entertainers as inspirational role models. But what if I told you that even a fun-loving place like YouTube has a dark side? What if I told you that even the most family-friendly, light-hearted YouTubers potentially have a dark secret? Welcome to the Dark Side of YouTube. I'm your host, Autumn Ivy, and with this series, my team and I will be taking the deepest dives into the darkest and most disturbing corners of YouTube. These are the stories YouTube doesn't want you to know about. From the creators of The Dark Side of Gaming and The Dark Swamp horror stories, you won't want to miss a single minute of The Dark Side of YouTube. Hey Darksiders, so glad to see you back. And just in time. This week we're diving into the case of Trey Sessler, the man many credit with paving the way for other anime review channels.
Even if you've never seen a Mr. Anime video, you've probably heard the name. But either way, you're about to learn all there is to know. Grab your snacks, spices, and blankets now,
because we're officially returning to the darkness. Trey Sessler was born August 3rd, 1989, in Waller, Texas. He had an older brother named Mark and two happily married, loving parents. His father, Lawton, was a teacher, and his mother, Rhonda, worked for the local newspaper, the Waller Times. By all accounts, Trey seems to have grown up in a nurturing environment. He wasn't abused at home, nor was he troubled by bullies at school. He was quiet-natured and a bit of a loner, but people generally considered him a pretty good kid. Even after he turned 13 and devised a plan to call 911 in order to report a suspicious figure lurking outside of his home. He wanted to hide in the woods with a baseball bat and ambush the arriving officer. The hope was to steal a gun and patrol car so he could drive to a friend's house and shoot him. But, thankfully, this plan never came to fruition. If I understand correctly, he actually shared this scheme with one of his teachers, which, of course, resulted in a psychiatric evaluation. But the matter was ultimately dropped. As Trey grew older, he seemed to mature, and his previous behavior was written off as a boys will be boys situation. Looking back, I think we can safely call that a whopping mistake. Early YouTube career. In September 2006, when Trey was about 16, he created his first YouTube channel, Lens Cap Productions. But it wasn't for anime reviews. He started off with short comedy skits. I watched him on a channel called Mr. Anime Season 3, and his first video was actually a short film titled The Renters. It's almost 3 minutes long and features 3 of his friends as renters, while Trey plays the landlord. If I'm being honest, it was, pretty terrible, actually. The video is a rotten potato quality and painfully cheesy. But, to be fair, we all suck in the beginning. There aren't many prodigies in real life. Most of us just kind of learn through the pains of failure. It sucks, but that's why we tell ourselves it builds character, so we can move past it. Besides, the main thing you needed to succeed back then was likability, and Trey had that. Although his editing skills were good, I will give him that. He put real effort into it. There's a scene where he slips on a dumbbell and face plants. He added rolling credits. It was an actual short film, only with the worst script and actors of all time. He never spoke to the camera directly until the 5th video, and I mention this because I feel like, it's probably not the best message to put out there since his previous skits involved shooting scenes with exploding blood packs beneath their shirts. I guess he just decided to do a tutorial on how they made that happen without professional equipment. So, after filling a Ziploc bag with fake blood, he tapes it to a piece of cardboard and adds a firecracker to the mix. And then he tapes it all to the middle of his torso beneath his shirt, lights the firecracker, lowers his shirt over it, and boom. Blood splatter. Which, I know some are technically safe to hold, but I feel like some kids may not understand the distinction when he follows this demonstration up with, quote, "The more powerful firecracker you have, obviously the better it's gonna be, but that pretty much sums up how to make a good bullet hit." Guys, with all due respect, we live in a world where kids really actually ate Tide Pods. I'm just throwing that out there for you. Unfortunately, I have no idea how these were received at the time, but the vast majority of videos involve shootouts or sword fights. Trey wouldn't even advertise reviews until September 19th of 2007, with a 23-second video featuring white text on a black screen asking one simple question. Are you a fan of anime? While anyone with sense is still shaking their heads in affirmation, the text goes on to announce Mr. Anime will soon be producing video reviews with a blast of comedy. Then the very next day, he uploaded a video of himself speaking directly to the camera as he reviewed Inuyasha. This is the format that would ultimately make him one of the most iconic OG YouTubers of all time. He seems to really hate poor Shippo, but he wasn't fond of the series as a whole. Overall, it only received a 5 out of 10 rating, which, considering it's one of the most popular animes of all time, and therefore usually given excellent reviews, Mr. Anime unwittingly set himself apart from the pack. He was extremely casual to the point of eating lunch during the review, and somehow he even managed to talk with his mouth full in a non-offensive way people couldn't help but, admire. Other reviewers would clearly fake their opinion or try to adopt some kind of gimmick, but Mr. Anime gave every show a fair shot and his actual feedback. From here out, reviews would become a seasonal occurrence, and he continued filming comedy skits with the occasional tutorial thrown in for good measure. I can forgive his complaints about Inuyasha. Most are valid, but his hateful review of Yu-Gi-Oh! Exposed him as soulless fairly early in his career. Though, listen, Paige wrote this, and I feel like Paige feels very strongly about Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm personally an old school. Look, let's move on, and you can judge him for yourself. To get an idea of his channel growth rate, a video uploaded in January 2008 mentioned the highest view count of a Mr. Anime episode was a little over 2,000, which was much more than he expected. Given his small audience size, he didn't believe many of them were likely to also be interested in watching anime reviews. It's actually pretty common for YouTubers to begin as one thing and then kind of transition into something completely different, but maybe not so much 14 years ago. The channel didn't grow much over that year. A video from November is titled "The Future of Mr. Anime," and in it, Trey says he hopes to have 1,000 subscribers before the end of December. He didn't quite make his goal, but he didn't miss it by too much. The 1,000 subscriber tribute was uploaded in late January of 2009 as a quick thank you to the fans. But it's odd to watch that now that we know who he ultimately becomes. In March, he posted his first video game review by playing Super Mario Kart, which was admittedly an excellent choice, but scripting and directing short films remained his primary passion. He did 3 quick reviews in succession, and the rest were few and far between. Before we move on to what Trey was doing in the real world, I want to share a few things I learned from a Q&A video he posted that April. One of the questions asks if he has a girlfriend, and in my opinion, his, quote, "No, I tried that in high school," response, coupled with the gesture of sliding his thumb across his throat, kind of felt like actual indifference. He probably wasn't single by choice, but he wasn't crying about it like an incel either. I just think he was actually genuinely indifferent to the matter. It's an interesting bit of irony, I think you'll all appreciate, is question number 13. How many people have you killed? Unfortunately, it's being asked a few years too soon. Oh, that was a terrible joke. He's never been shy to admit his preference for short films over reviews, but we get a small glimpse at how wide the gap really is when question 23 is asked. Will there be a Mr. Anime Season 3? And Trey's only response is, I hope not. Regardless of his preference, Mr. Anime is what got him the most clicks, so he had to keep doing it. Of course, the numbers still weren't high. In the first half of 2009, he says he's almost to 1,250 subscribers, but his views were rising at better rates. Mark had also started his own channel for reviews and became the Anime Analyst. Trey promoted him often, and many of Mr. Anime's 3rd season episodes featured Mark as a guest. I stared at the computer screen for over an hour after I watched the review of Full Metal Panic. I didn't include it before, but Mark actually gave Trey a box set of collection for Christmas a couple years prior. Kind of became a little bit of a thing on the show, Trey really loved the gift. He planned to watch and review it for a Mr. Anime episode, but, life got in the way, the review got delayed, announced again, delayed, over and over, and you get the drift. Then, finally, on September 6th, Mr. Anime posted an almost 10-minute-long video where he and Mark discussed it together. And because it's still Trey, the video obviously includes a long, elaborate fight scene, but it ends with the brothers going inside to watch anime together. To see it knowing what's coming, I don't know what to say about that. There's really honestly nothing that can be said, so we're simply going to move on for now. We'll be coming back to this soon enough anyway. Though despite years of experience, neither brother's acting skills had really improved in the slightest. Let's switch gears and talk about what Trey was up to in the real world for a moment. After graduating in 2007, he attended college but had trouble holding a regular job, and this became a point of contention with his father. Trey worked at grocery stores, a campground, pizza place, ice cream shop, gas station. Hell, he even worked at a go-kart track, but he never lasted very long at any of them. As he put more time and energy into his channel, matters of the real world began to interest Trey less and less, with a few key exceptions: serial killers and mass shootings. Early 2009 was when he posted his first video discussing the topic, but there wasn't anything alarming in the video itself. He simply discussed his disappointment with society from the perspective of a, quote, responsible gun owner. Another notable moment of irony. Aside from a strange analysis of what he thinks would happen if the US was invaded, He doesn't mention the subject again for several months. That November, during Trey's second year of college, he announced he's majoring in sociology and has 4 more years to go in order to earn his master's degree. I mean, is it wrong to laugh at that? Is that inappropriate? You know what? I didn't ask. Trey's spiral. 2010 starts off seeming to be Trey's best year ever, but soon takes a notable turn in March when Trey uploaded his 2,000 subscriber tribute, another 4-minute film with his brother. It's mostly just another fight scene, but it's nice to have a basic idea of the channel's growth rate with the timeline. It seems like he gets serious about building his audience at this point because he suddenly does a long string of reviews with minimal skits in between. Though, considering what's coming, it could be that he simply didn't have time to make his usual content. The first warning signs didn't appear on camera until a September 25th upload, where Trey mentions one of his rabbits is missing. Of course, to those watching at home, just like it was any other week, it didn't immediately seem like a red flag. I mean, runaway pets are a fairly common occurrence, right? His bunny somehow escaped from his hatch, hadn't come back yet, that's all. But if that is the case, his next statement of, quote, "So you won't be seeing him anymore, unfortunately, haha," feels particularly ominous, especially the creepy chuckle at the end. I mean, it's painfully clear he's pleased with his little deception. His upload frequency noticeably dropped, but after his first missing bunny comment, things were mostly business as usual, until November 12th, when Mr. Anime is Injured was uploaded. Trey appears on camera with a slightly swollen cut on his left cheek. Due to legal and insurance reasons, he cannot disclose any details about the accident. But he wanted to let fans know he wouldn't be able to appear on camera for a while. Except for in the video that they were currently watching. He felt his face wasn't suitable for filming, which I feel like it was kind of just an excuse to continue slacking off, but hey, what do I know? He estimated it could take a week to heal, but hoped it would be sooner. I mean, seriously, guys, look, it was this, tiny cut on his cheek. I mean, I just can't eat. Anyway, it was sus as hell. I checked the next upload date to see how long the week had stretched out, which, for the record, was December 5th, and the final video of the year. But the title alone said it all. Missing Bunny Documentary. My heart sank. What the hell had this little prick done now? Thankfully, it's less than 2 minutes, but he did put a significant amount of effort into copying a cliché unsolved mysteries documentary. He treats it like any other comedy routine. He used a deep voice changer for the dramatic narrator and told his story from the perspective of a family member being interviewed. Essentially, he claims to have gone out to the cage like any other day, but Toby was gone, leaving only a small trace of fur behind. Well, the rabbit's name was Toby until this documentary, and then it was suddenly the payoff. I think I missed an inside joke, but we're over 200 episodes into this garbage. You'll have to cut me a little bit of slack on this one, Yeah. Fuck. Anyway, he inserted a picture of a police officer and did some kind of drunken squirrel voice to say there was no sign of criminal activity. But continuing in the mockumentary style, interviewee Trey returned to give his theory that Toby was kidnapped. When he pretended to be choked up at the loss, I had serious Randy Stair flashbacks of just wanting to shake somebody. I can't be completely sure, but it forced to guess the first time Trey uploaded a video while drunk. I mean, I would say probably Mr. Anime Review Zip Bang from, January 2nd, 2011. He deviated from his usual format of sitting at a table to standing, and adding a few screenshots of the anime between talking points. But it didn't seem well thought out. Aside from the uncomfortable camera angle, there was a few moments where his jokes kind of spiral into something that one might hear in a drunk man's rant. He'd always seemed comfortable with his audience. But this seemed like he was getting a little too comfortable and being a little too honest, if you know what I mean. It's round about this time Trey's grandmother dies. Her home was located in Hempstead, just a 15-minute drive from Waller. So Trey moved in to keep an eye on the property. His time spent there alone allowed his imagination to run wild, and he withdrew further and further from reality. On January 16th, Trey uploaded a video to announce an AMV contest. It's not relevant to our story, but like AMVs are fan-made anime music videos. Honestly, I used to do them back in the day and they were pretty lit, but that's besides the point. Among certain communities, the art of combining anime clips to popular songs is practically a sport. And, to be fair, a lot of them are super cool and delightful. This contest announcement also served as his 3,000 subscribers tribute. Mr. Anime Reviews continued to outshine his short films, so Trey made a plea to his audience in hopes they give his other content a chance. But it seems to have largely fallen on deaf ears. Despite what the analytics said, he wanted his primary focus to be on making short films, and that's why he spent the next several weeks preparing for another new mini-series. On February 25th, he announced The Trey Show would revolve around life living with his twin. Cloning himself was a trick he used since the beginning of his YouTube career, so it's not surprising he'd continue the theme. The first episode was uploaded just 3 days later, though we're now going on 5 years of this and his acting skills, still hadn't improved. He just was too generous with the laugh track. Fuck, I'm just saying, God. The new show, coupled with Mr. Anime episodes, are enough to keep Trey busy through March, and it's heartbreaking to see that he adopts a kitten and a ferret in the following weeks. But let's skip to April 14th, when he uploads Mr. Anime is Drunk. I'm not sure if he intended people to think that he was only pretending to drink, or if he actually wanted to show that he didn't care what people thought of his drinking. Or, if I've missed the agenda entirely, fuck, I don't know. I'm simply going to relay what he said while sloshing around his beer bottle on the Mr. Anime set. Except I'm gonna spare you the slurring. The whole thing's only 2 minutes long. Trey starts with the usual introduction of, "Hi, I'm Mr. Anime," but spices things up with, "I don't really have a show for you. I don't even know why I'm here." He claims he was chilling at a bar, but his executive producer dragged him away and suggested doing a video about being drunk and fucked up. Because he already looked so drunk and fucked up. You gotta love the good old let's use the truth and pretend it's a joke strategy, because that works so well. Most of his ramblings sound like nonsense if you aren't aware that he's, referencing earlier skits when calling Inuyasha his neighbor. But to be fair, you can barely understand his words at all during that part. After he says the outro, there's a quick pause, like he's waiting for the camera to be cut off, before having an outburst that, well, whether it was planned or not, was way certainly drunken. Did I just do a review? What the hell am I doing here? John, are you guys exposing me for my drunkenness? And the video ends with him falling to the ground. His first shooting demonstration came on September 1st. He took a .22 caliber pistol to an isolated overpass and shot at a soda can until finally hitting it. Though it was a short video, he seems to have enjoyed it because he returned to the same location 5 days later with a 9mm rifle test. And if I'm not mistaken, he seems to be slurring for this one. He also used edits to ensure that he actually hit his targets. Trey's mental health was declining at a rapid pace. Not only was he drinking more than ever, he periodically abused other substances such as Seroquel, Xanax, weed, methamphetamines, and Oxycontin. And sometimes he would pawn a gun in order to buy drugs until he got more money. I'm not sure exactly where he dropped out of college, but according to a Q&A, he was still attending as of that December. This is also the video where Trey shows off an AR-15 with a 100-round magazine. As we move along, just remember that this is something he owns. An automatic rifle with a 100-round magazine. Okay? Keep that in the back of your head. Lawton was understandably upset to learn his son was quitting school. Their arguments grew worse and more frequent, but it wasn't the only source of contention between the two. The family had also developed a deep concern for Trey's alcohol consumption. Even Mark tried to intervene when it came to his brother's drinking, but he was unable to make an impact. It's hard to pinpoint the first time it happened, but comments accusing Mr. Anime of using his pets for target practice began to make their appearance. Some were merely the speculation of those connecting his love of guns and increasingly strange behavior to his missing pets. But others were from people claiming to have seen the events unfold in real life. Spoiler alert, they weren't just rumors. He also developed an obsession with serial killers, and much like our first subject, Randy Stair, Mr. Anime took a particular interest in the Columbine High massacre. He even filled notebooks with different killers' statistics and gave them all a rating between 1 and 10, with his personal thoughts on each subject. Though unlike Randy, Trey actually attempted to hide his descent into madness. People could tell something was wrong, but they didn't understand just how wrong. His main goal, the dream he spent most of his time planning, was his ultimate fantasy of getting the highest kill count possible in his own shooting spree. His target kill count was a minimum of 70 victims. He wanted to do something that would truly shake the world to its core. Ultimately, Trey decided the best way to do this was with a school shooting. And his primary focus became Waller High, where he himself had graduated. He even studied satellite images of the school while making his plans. The idea was to wait for the homecoming game and shoot into the stands until being killed or captured by police. In order to practice for the big event, Trey would go around town at night starting small fires and shooting into empty buildings. That Christmas, Trey told a friend he was planning to kill his father because he believed Lawton had given up on him. He hadn't, but you couldn't convince Trey otherwise. The fights with Mark and Lawton over his alcohol and drug use continued to grow worse through the holiday. And finally, on December 27th, Trey uploaded a video titled, "Bad News, Please Watch," where he told fans he had been diagnosed with pneumothorax. A pneumo what now? Basically, pneumothorax meant that one of his lungs was leaking air. What caused his condition is unknown, but he was in pain, having difficulty breathing, and not sleeping well, among a slew of other symptoms. How much of it was true? Who knows? In February of 2012, Trey uploaded a video to inform his fans he'd be taking a 2 to 3 week vacation as a way of rewarding himself. And during that time, his strange behavior would increase significantly. Roughly 2 weeks later, Trey actually called the police from his backyard to report a bullet whizzing past his head, and he told the dispatcher his guns were ready. Officers did come out to investigate, but they found nothing out of the ordinary. In March, he uploaded Mr. Anime's new job, where he announced receiving a position at a filmmaking company, but he didn't reveal which one, probably because it didn't exist. Then he advised that while he wouldn't have as much time to make videos, he would try to maintain a blogging presence. While many would be surprised by this announcement, not even Trey realized that this would actually be his final video. The murder. On March 19th, he began drinking and continued straight through into the early morning hours of the 20th. Despite how drunk he was, he managed to get himself back to his parents, and he was armed. Obviously, the family was not expecting him. Rhonda and Mark were still awake, so Trey called his mother into the garage under the guise of checking something on his car. When they were alone, he shot her at point-blank range in the chest. He regretted his actions instantly, but it didn't matter if he changed his mind. It was too late to turn back. He couldn't very well go tell Mark and his father, "Hey, I had just killed Mom. Sorry." No. That was unthinkable. Not understanding what he heard, Mark called out, complaining of the loud noise. And without saying a word, Trey walked right past his brother retrieved a Glock 9mm full of hollow points, entered the hallway, and shot Mark twice. The noise finally woke Lawton, who was upstairs in bed, and he too called out in confusion. So, Trey went upstairs, entered his parents' bedroom, and shot his father twice in the head. He then retraced his steps through the home to ensure no one was still in pain, and somehow, his brother had indeed survived long enough to crawl into a bathroom where he locked himself inside. Trey shot through the door several times before hitting the deadlock and kicking it open, to find his brother curled in fetal position, unmoving. Wanting to be absolutely sure everyone was dead, he retrieved his AR-15 and returned to the garage where Rhonda still lay in the same position. He put 2 bullets in her head, just to be sure. And then he decided it was best to do the same to Mark and Lawton as well. With his loved ones definitely dead, Trey left voicemails with the school and newspaper to inform them his parents would not be able to make it into work. Then he killed the family pets, broke almost every piece of glass in the house, wrote confessions all over the walls, doors, and cabinets, and essentially wrecked everything he could lay his hands on. He even ripped the stove door off its hinges and emptied the refrigerator. Police would later describe it as a war zone. The messages expressed regret for his actions. He wrote things like, "Why did I do this?" and "God forgive me because I cannot forgive myself," among other similar sentiments, before going back into the garage, curling up next to his mother's body, and falling asleep. The aftermath. When he was ready to leave his childhood home for the final time, Trey loaded his rifle and more than 100 rounds of ammunition into his Mustang and headed towards his old school, ready to complete his master plan. Once there, he remained in the parking lot, just sitting in his vehicle for an extended period of time. Thankfully, he couldn't go through with his horrible intentions. Things had simply become too real for Trey. Instead, he drove to a friend's house in Magnolia. While this was happening, neighbors called the police to report gunfire, but no immediate action was taken. It wouldn't be until another relative had grown concerned for Rhonda and Lawton not returning their calls that officers would make their way to the scene at roughly 1 o'clock that afternoon. They began by searching the perimeter before looking through the home's windows, but once they saw the damage inside, they entered immediately to discover the 3 dead bodies of Rhonda, Lawton, and Mark Sessler, along with Trey's written confessions. Ultimately, they would find and arrest him at the friend's house. During interrogation, Trey said he loved his family and would protect them with his life, but at the same time, if anyone was going to hurt them, it was going to be him. He also had a morbid fascination with their deaths, and he asked for very specific details on their autopsy reports, such as which shots delivered the fatal blows. At one point in his interrogation, Trey places partial blame for his actions on the internet, stating, quote, "Without the internet, I really don't think I'd be sitting here. The internet has the web of information that I needed to study these events that otherwise would not necessarily be recorded." Basically, he's trying to say he wouldn't have been able to formulate his big fucking plans if the computer hadn't taught him what he needed to know. Then again, he also told police he couldn't go more than a few days without the urge to commit violent acts. He wrote a 12-page manifesto outlining other killers' strengths and weaknesses. I mean, good God. Perhaps the worst part is the reason that he gave for murdering every member of his family. He only killed them so they wouldn't have to endure the shame of knowing what he really was. Obviously, since he didn't go through with the mass shooting, this means 3 people died for literally no reason. Don't get me wrong, we should all be extremely thankful that the situation didn't end significantly worse. I'm just pointing out an observation in this logic, and honestly, that's some kind of logic. In the end, Trey pled guilty to murdering his family, and in August of 2012, he was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. So far, he's never appealed or contested the sentence. He's made statements saying he belongs behind bars for what he did. And in the following years, There were several rumors he committed suicide in prison, but they proved to be false. He's still alive and in the special care of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. When his channel was finally deleted in September of 2012, it had 323 videos. But, as discussed, they have been re-uploaded to YouTube. The conclusion. That, my friends, was the story of Trey Sessler. But I want to conclude this episode with something infinitely more important. As I've said before, we don't research these cases solely to entertain those with a love for the dark and dreadful. I mean, that's just a happy bonus that comes with the territory. Well, stay twisted, friends, we love ya, but seriously, these podcasts serve two much higher, sincere, serious agendas. First, to educate others in recognizing possible red flags in their own lives, or hell, I mean, even in a favorite YouTuber. You never know where you will see it. That's the point. And second, we're here to honor the victims. In this instance, 3 wonderful people lost their lives in a span of minutes for literally no reason. So I just want to say a few more words about them. Lawton was a kind man who dedicated his life to not only his family, but the children he taught. And Rhonda's co-workers described her as a precise wordsmith with a, quote, contagious laugh that could help even the darkest day seem a little brighter. Her high school best friend, Jeanette Garrett, wrote an article in 2016 discussing this case in great detail, including how Rhonda would adopt the unpopular girls, taking them in under her wing, how she went on to become their class valedictorian before ultimately graduating from Houston State University in Huntsville. Mark's case hurts the most. After watching him perform goofy stunts with his little brother for hours upon hours, it's impossible not to feel like you maybe kind of knew him a little, you know? By all accounts, he was a loyal friend and a good man. No matter how far down the rabbit hole Trey took himself, Mark refused to give up on his little brother. I can't begin to imagine what he must have thought as Trey raised his gun in that hallway, or the agony that he must have endured on his crawl to the bathroom. After years of dedicating so much of his time to his little brother, he deserved far more from life. Remember the Sessler family fondly. May they rest in peace. Once again, we must emerge from our cozy darkness. But this time, we do so with the comfort of knowing it's finally fall, baby. And if you've liked our content so far, just wait until you see what's coming next. Make sure you're following us on TikTok for all the latest updates, and if you're joining in on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. Or not, you know, that's cool. Like, I'm gonna find you, but that's cool too. Either way, I'll be back next week with another tale from our endless journey through the dark side of YouTube. In the meantime, if you want to know more about the Mr. Anime case, I highly recommend checking out the video by Coffeehouse Crime and Jeanette's article on crimemagazine.com. Oh, and as always, Darksiders, don't forget, don't do anything I wouldn't do. In light of this episode and the discussion about mental health, I personally would like to add something on. And to be honest, I don't know if it's going to make it or if it's going to get cut, but I feel like it's important for me personally to say, I pride myself on making, daily motivation videos, let's call them, or somewhat motivational content when I can and when I'm up for it. And as someone who struggles with their own personal mental health issues, I know what it's like to have to deal with, all manner of bullshit and what that looks like, especially in a country that doesn't exactly support people who have mental health issues of any capacity. Some of us don't have the support we need. Some of us can't afford it. Some of us just don't know how to ask for help because we didn't have the toolbox to be able to say, hey, I can't do this alone. So I just wanted to say that sometimes you need to take a step back. Check on your friends, especially the ones that are making jokes and smiling and laughing, because sometimes those are the people that hide it the best. If you yourself are struggling, I implore you, I know how hard it is to ask someone else for help. Find somebody that you trust. Tell them that you can't do it by yourself, even if you can't use the words directly. I would ask that you find a way to open that toolbox up and grab what you can out of the box to say that you need a little bit of help fixing the pipes, you know? If a friend of yours has you concerned, check in on them. It takes 2 seconds to send a hello. And even if they may not reply, sometimes just hearing that somebody cares matters the world over to people. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. We can't make progress to continue to be better versions of ourselves if we're not willing to get out there and give it an honest effort. Sometimes that effort's really fucking hard, and that's okay. But at least try, you know? So please take care of yourselves and please take care of each other the best you can. That's all I'd ask. Welcome back, Darksiders. Are you ready for another week of YouTubers gone wild? Of course you are. I knew you couldn't stay away. Tonight, we're diving into the case of Samantha Wohlford, or, as no one remembers her, Simply Manic 6075, a small-town Texas girl with big city dreams and murderous tendencies. Her family of 7 was drowning in debt, even with her husband working 2 jobs, and, out of options, Samantha was forced to seek out employment. Unfortunately, she chose a career with low success rates and went into it with absolutely no research, preparation, or strategies. She became a YouTuber. Dun dun dun. Needless to say, things didn't go well. But don't worry. Once again, we consumed hours of deranged rants, so you wouldn't have to. Now, get those snacks and vices ready, because we're descending into the darkness. Samantha was many things, but let's start with the basics. Born on August 28th of 1989, she was the oldest of 3 siblings and was raised by both parents. They lived in Mount Pleasant, but there isn't much else to say about the town. The population barely exceeds 17,000. It really is pretty tiny. As far as her childhood, it seems to have been fairly pleasant. There were no signs of abuse or neglect. Just another average family. Throughout these early years in high school, Samantha was generally described as a happy, friendly girl who dreamed of becoming an actress. She loved being on the internet, and much of her time was spent on MySpace and Facebook. Her life wouldn't really begin to change until her senior year, when she was 19. Not long after, she began dating her first boyfriend, a fellow senior. Samantha became pregnant with twins. They were born in 2008, and her first love proved to be only lust when she found herself raising the babies as a single mother. She had help from family, but she wasn't thrilled with her life. She had no money, no job, no husband, and she felt like she deserved the full package. Luckily for her, she would only be stuck in this slump for a couple of months before meeting Ernie Ibarra in a tattoo shop. Getting a tattoo was nothing new for Samantha. She had plenty of them already and would go on to get plenty more, but that wasn't the case for Ernie. In fact, it was very out of character for him. Before that night, he rarely concerned himself with anything outside of his gaming or computer interests. He was very intelligent, but also shy and reserved. It was a bad breakup that sent him spiraling into a depression and somewhat alt phase. For the first time in his life, he chose to walk into a tattoo parlor, and sadly, that choice would ultimately cost this man his life. That may be the most disturbing part of this whole case. Who among us hasn't gone out for a bit of soul-searching after a breakup? Can you imagine if your life depended on one of those nights? I mean, fuck's sakes, never mind. This isn't about me. Now, Samantha's first YouTube video was posted on November 15th of 2010, and all she did was read child abuse articles and complain about CPS for 11 minutes. It's horrible, and she wouldn't post again for an entire year. But if you want to see it for yourself, her channel is still available. She has just over 3,000 subscribers, but she had less than 100 before she became a murderer. Most of her views are in the toilet, though. There are a handful of lines that went viral when she first made the headlines. Don't worry, there'll be plenty more about her content. But first, we need to finish setting the scene. She and Ernie began dating, and he was a genuinely good man who cared for Samantha's daughters as if they were his own. I cannot express that enough through this video. He didn't make a whole lot working for a baseball and softball manufacturer, but it was enough to support their family of 4. Just not a family of 6. That's right. In 2011, they had another set of twins. Do you know what the odds of that are? For a woman to have 2 sets of twins back to back? You know, honestly, I didn't either, but apparently it's like 1 in 700,000. Yeah, no kidding. Samantha always thought she was special. And in this instance, she was right. For someone who was already a statistical anomaly to actually become, a murderer too, that just doesn't happen every day, especially not one that goes down the way that this one did. Whew. Anyway, that's when Ernie had to pick up a second job at Little Caesars while Samantha remained a stay-at-home mom and YouTuber. He didn't complain about it either. He was ecstatic to have those kids. They were his entire world. Every marriage has its issues, but for the most part, this one started off fairly happy. The stress of raising children can get extreme, sure, but when your biggest complaint about your partner is that he spends too much time playing video games, I mean, I'm sorry, but in my experience, that means you picked a winner. At least, that was Samantha's only problem with Ernie. I mean, he ended up having quite a few problems with her. It'd be one thing for her to be a stay-at-home mom if she were caring for the children, cooking, cleaning. But the house was a wreck and the kids were being ignored while her husband drowned under the weight of 2 jobs. When Ernie finally broke down and asked her to look for work, her solution was to rekindle her dream of becoming a YouTube star. You may be thinking, no, I mean, surely she did something to help with the money, right? But yeah, you'd be wrong. No. In her videos, she only mentioned 2 other possible sources of income. And personally, I don't believe either one. First, there's being a piercer at her father's tattoo parlor, which, I can believe she may have done that at some point. I concede it's possible, but I would be absolutely shocked if she spent more than 8 hours a month there. Let alone a day. If her general personality and character aren't enough reason to feel that way, wait till you hear the next one. She was playing extras in different films. She even worked with Gerard Butler and Rooney Mara. No, I'm not kidding. That is literally what she claimed. Not as a joke either, and not in a way that she could say that we misunderstood. She genuinely, seriously, got on camera and talked about filming these movies as if it was not a big deal. Just the most natural thing in the world. Honestly, this lie may be the one that confuses me the most. Out of all the lies she told, this is the one I keep coming back to. Usually lies have a purpose or originate in some kind of a truth, but I can't figure out where the hell this came from. It's like she was in some independent movie, and decided to throw out a name that people would recognize. It's not like any viewers she gained would stick around without Googling for more information. The video was pre-recorded, so it had to be planned. I mean, what the hell was she thinking, I know fake it till you make it's a real thing, but that only works if you're able to sustain the lies with actual talent. Oh, and while we're talking about her ridiculous lying, there's also a video where she claims her house burned down. It's hard to find adjectives that accurately describe her passionless plea for sympathy, but it's a hot mess. It's one thing to lie to the internet and expect to get away with it, but I don't understand what she expected her family to think. Oh well, we have lots of ground to cover. We should probably get back to it. Can we pretend that YouTube fantasy was actually like a feasible idea for a second? Because in order to succeed, she would have needed some form of skill. Not even necessarily the right equipment, since the standards were significantly lower in 2011, but whether it's singing, comedy, art, or just talking about an interesting topic, every YouTuber needs a shtick. You need to give the audience a reason to click, a reason to stay, and a reason to return. I'm telling you right now, Samantha gave them zilch of those things. While there are vloggers who make a living from simply talking about their lives and interests, they still have planned topics and script their dialogues to a certain extent. You won't find many famous ones who just switch on a camera and say whatever pops into their head. But that's what Samantha did. Most of her videos are under 10 minutes, and if she ever filmed an introduction explaining who she is and what she hoped to achieve, it's long gone. The second video was posted a year after the CPS rant, and it literally starts with, "Hey YouTubers, today a lot of shit pissed me off, so you guys get to listen to it." The fact that she thought anyone wanted to hear her complain would be funny if it weren't so, well, tragic. The 5-minute video is divided between complaints about her cousin's groom and almost hitting a deer on her way home from the wedding. It's hard to say which upset her more, but both were very clearly traumatic because she had to upload another video right after it to include all the things she forgot to say. Apparently, people were being very judgmental towards her cousin for choosing to get married so young, and Samantha was extremely offended by this. I know the prospect of watching friends and family shame a loved one on their wedding day sounds like something reasonable to be upset about, especially when you're only hearing me relay it to you in those words, but trust me, this was not that reasonable, and it's probably exaggerated like the rest of her content. I may not have any background in psychology, but I have an extensive background in crazy, and I can almost guarantee you this chick was fantasizing about all those haters watching her video and fearing her power. In reality, her friends and family felt violated by her constant need to air drama on YouTube. But it's painfully clear Samantha didn't give a damn. I have no idea how she fueled these delusions with no fans, but I can't fathom anyone outside of the people that she knew in real life who saw them. I mean, even those people were only watching to see the carnage. Life was hard, and they had to budget, but they were able to get by until 2013, when the couple had their 5th and final child. The extra costs would be their breaking point. And Ernie finally spoke to Samantha about helping with the bills. Remember how I said her only real complaint was the time Ernie spent gaming? Well, that was before she learned one of his avatars had married another woman. I guess I'm the only one nerdy enough to care which game it was because, like, nobody, no one was really being specific. But yeah, like, that pissed Samantha off pretty good. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, avatars are the characters that represent us in video games, and sometimes those characters are able to pair with other people's characters for reasons. Yeah, I don't think too much about that part. Now, most guys would probably end the virtual marriage, cut contact with the other woman, and call it a day. But Ernie decided to prove his love by really marrying Samantha. However, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear this didn't fix their problems. He kept right on gaming while she kept right on pissing him off with YouTube and letting the house go to hell. One of her more shocking videos takes place while she's pregnant with the second set of twins. It begins with her saying she failed to keep up with her pregnancy vlog and looks exactly like all of her other posts. And that's why it's so jarring when she suddenly brings her cigarette into frame and takes a huge puff. Now let's ignore how ridiculously easy it would have been to smoke before or after she filmed. I mean, that would ruin the fun. Instead, let's talk about how she justified her actions. Don't worry, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She had a doctor's permission. You see, Samantha doesn't have any vices like most people, and she simply has too much stress in her life to just quit cold turkey. That would actually be worse for the baby's health, since she could go into premature labor. She has no choice but to smoke a few times a day. Yeah, I hope you can hear all the sarcasm oozing from my voice. It's probably worth noting that the other children weren't much safer in her care. There's also footage of her daughter dancing in the passenger seat while Samantha is driving at significant speed through what appears to be a residential area. Oh, and while I'm pointing out the insanely narcissistic hypocritical ranting, there's one more thing I want to share. So nothing pisses Samantha off more than stupidity. And while we could spend a few minutes on the irony of this alone, I want to focus on what she believes society should do with the stupid people. She's absolutely horrible at articulating her thoughts, but she essentially has two ways of going about this. A vaccine or colony. Which, yes, it's exactly what they sound like. Cure them with a vaccine or separate them into their own colony. Away from the rest of us. I truly cannot fathom how she thought her videos were going to make her famous. It's a level of delusion beyond my comprehension. So, this is where things really start to get ugly. The couple was miserable with each other, and things were getting worse with each passing day until Ernie finally had enough. He couldn't take coming home to a disgusting house and neglected children after 14-hour shifts anymore. So he moved out. If only he had stayed out, we wouldn't be sitting here and talking about him. Ultimately, Samantha would drag him back into her web, and she did nothing to change her ways. The next time Ernie had enough, he wanted a divorce, and he planned to take the kids with him. But Samantha was never going to allow that to happen. She went straight for the crazy bitch playbook and began accusing Ernie of abuse. She said it to her friends, family, her channel. His family and those closest to him knew they were lies, but what could they do about it? I mean, obviously Ernie was really hurt and concerned by this, but equally as helpless. This guy didn't have a violent bone in his body. In the early morning hours of February 20th, 2015, Samantha's aunt called 911 to report a home invasion and kidnapping. She told the operator that 3 men broke into her niece's home, tied her up, and beat her husband before dragging him out of the house. Police arrived at 2:19 a.m., and Samantha walked them through the scene. The body cam footage and interrogation are on YouTube as well if you want to see how bad of an actress she actually is. But for now, let me give you the rundown on her version of the events. But remember, even before she opens her mouth, she's starting off at a disadvantage. When something like this happens, spouses are already the first suspect. But when you have such an unusual situation, like a kidnapping with a male victim, the cops are going to start off doubly suspicious. They just are. 3 men dressed in black supposedly broke into Samantha and Ernie's house while they slept. The couple was dragged from bed and moved downstairs where Ernie was forced to look at his wife while being taunted and pistol whipped by the assailants until, eventually, Samantha was returned upstairs to be tied and gagged. The men then took her car keys and fled the scene with Ernie. While tied up, Samantha managed to reach her phone, to which she then used her face to call her mother. When asked why she could call her mother instead of 911, she immediately clarifies that she pressed the call button enough times to call the last person she spoke with, which happened to be her mother. Now, I don't know if she planned that excuse ahead of time or if it just caught her off guard, but it's the only thing she got right, so I'll give her that much credit. Most people gloss over where she explains this part, but I honestly do try to be as accurate as possible. While it's only my opinion, I think she wanted to call her mom first for 2 reasons. 1, she was scared and wanted her mother there, but even more importantly, it delayed the beginning of her performance. 911 calls are recorded, and any minor slip of character would be perfectly preserved for a jury of her peers. This brings us back to where we started, with the 911 call. Her mother, Rosie, had actually been at a club while her daughter, Natasha, were standing outside, speaking with the club's owner when they received Samantha's call. The poor woman describes it as the most terrifying moment of her life. Her oldest daughter hysterically screaming into the phone, but her words unintelligible. Rosie had no idea what had happened, only that it was something horrible. When she was finally able to make out the details, she called her sister in a panic, and everyone made their way to Samantha's home, where her aunt would finally make the 911 call. Now, we can talk about what the police found when walking through the crime scene. Didn't take long for them to grow suspicious of Samantha. In fact, it was her own mother who pointed out the unusual situation of the children's sleeping arrangement. Normally, they slept spread out in their own rooms. But this night, all 5 were sound asleep in the back bedroom, having never woken during the attack. There was also a surprising lack of blood for a scene where a victim was pistol-whipped, and nothing was stolen. Through questioning Samantha, they learned the assailants are in possession of Ernie's phone, and the officer immediately calls in the lead on his radio, excited by the news. He only needs the phone's number. But Samantha is frozen like a deer in the headlights, wide-eyed and stammering. The officer stands by, anxiously waiting to pass it along, hand still on his radio. And Samantha can only say she doesn't remember it. Noticing her phone clutched in her hands, the officer then asked if Ernie's number was saved to her contacts list. And of course, it was. After reluctantly sharing the information and learning the phone can be used to track her husband's location, Samantha asks to call her mother, who had previously left with the children. Obviously, she was allowed to do so, but what detectives wouldn't learn until later is that she texted someone else first. Someone she warned to, quote, "kill phone, shut that shit down." When asked for the names of anyone who may be responsible, she initially plays dumb. But once pressed, she paints Ernie's father as a drug lord who recently pissed off a rival gang. At one point, she took it so far as to say Ernie was involved with the family business, but had quit. Which, of course, was a reason to say Ernie's father had also been upset with him. But it's okay. These cops weren't stupid. With Samantha looking more suspicious by the minute, they take her to the police station for a formal interrogation, and the case against her only grows stronger from there. She tried to maintain her original story, but the details began to change one by one as each lie was exposed. One interesting, if disgusting, change is how often she found ways to compliment herself while describing Ernie's beating. What starts off as simply being forced to look at him soon includes new dialogue from the assailants. They repeatedly yelled things like, "Look at her! You see how pretty she is? How could you treat her like that?" In all the crimes I've researched, I've never seen someone with such an absolute lack of shame. There are no depths to which this bitch will not sink. The detective kept pushing, insisting she knew who did it, until finally, she cracked. She wasn't ready to accept she'd been caught, but she was ready to throw her accomplices under the proverbial bus. She says the only thing she might know, but she isn't sure about. Then, after begging to remain anonymous lest she be the next to disappear, she proceeds to spill the beans about a mysterious man called John Rebel. Well, that's his name on Facebook anyway. She tried to keep his real name secret just a little while longer. You see, earlier that day, Samantha had visited a friend in the hospital who had just given birth. And while there, she met the friend's boyfriend, John. During the course of her visit, she spoke of being abused by her husband, an offense the rebel man took quite seriously. Though she thought he was joking at the time, his offer to, quote, handle the situation suddenly seemed much more genuine. Don't worry, the detective wasn't buying a word of this garbage either. While Samantha's mouth kept digging her hole, police were looking into John. Didn't take long to learn the mystery man from the hospital was actually Jonathan Sanford. One of the many things they discovered when looking into this man was CCTV footage that proved he was a little closer to the victim's wife than Samantha would have led them to believe. For one thing, he was seen taking her children to school and Walmart. Whether they had any form of sexual relationship, I can't confirm one way or another. But if I were forced to guess, I'd assume they were banging. Again, that's just me, but I don't know, you tell me. Do you guys make a habit of taking random women's children around? School? Walmart? Grocery shopping? Yeah. Either way, The most important thing you need to know about John is that until very recently, he'd been in prison for assaulting his cousin. This was enough to bring him in for questioning, and 2 more were close behind. As it turns out, his brother-in-law, Jose Ponce, and Octavius Rhymes were the other men involved. Even after all 3 were arrested, Samantha maintained her innocence, insisting she never dreamed Jonathan's threats could have been valid. This is when the detectives would receive warrants for all 4 suspects' phones, and they found much more than the messages that I told you about earlier. In fact, that text wasn't the only warning she sent to Octavius. Shortly after the first message, she overheard chatter on the radio stating that the phone's last known location, which prompted another warning, quote, "Ditch phone. Move." There was nothing left to hide. That doesn't mean that Samantha finally confessed. No, we'll likely never get that pleasure. But when confronted with the evidence, her story changed yet again. Now, her excuse relied on her use of Ambien the night before. For those who don't know, Ambien is a powerful sleeping pill, one that can only be purchased with a prescription. If you take it and stay awake, it can have serious side effects and cause hallucinations. Some people take it specifically to get high. It genuinely can mess you up if not taken responsibly. I mean, that is completely true, but to say it was the reason she helped her husband's murderers evade law enforcement? No, that was never gonna fly. It's not even like they texted her and she responded. She had enough foresight to lie about calling her mother, and then she blatantly warned the killers to move when hearing that the police had found their location. Period. Luckily for the police, they wouldn't need to play Samantha's game much longer because Jonathan decided to confess. He told detectives everything. One night, Samantha told Jonathan and his girlfriend that Ernie regularly abused her and the children. She must have spun quite the tale, because it doesn't sound like it took very long for John to offer his assistance. I feel like most people would offer a place to stay or help moving out or, I don't know. I'm just really confused as to what she could have possibly said in order to get that reaction. I mean, to be fair, murder wasn't the first solution he suggested. The first was to plant felony amounts of meth in Ernie's truck and then call in an anonymous tip to the police, but you'll never guess why that didn't work. It wasn't because they couldn't get the meth. That was the easy part. Samantha actually went with them to make the purchase. Of course, she didn't have a babysitter, so all 5 children had to go along for the ride, but hey, no worries. Anything to get them away from that abusive bastard, right? Fuck. Now let me paint the scene for you. We got Jonathan, Jose, Octavius, and Samantha all sitting around with this sack of meth and talking about how Ernie was finally going to get what's coming to him. They would wait for him to come home from work, hide it in his truck, and then call the police. But once they actually had the drugs right there in front of them, the plan didn't sound so solid anymore. None of them were thrilled at the prospect of involving police, so, and probably after sampling a little bit of the product, they decided, hey, what the fuck, let's just kill him. Considering this plan would actually involve a much heavier police presence, I mean, I can't be the only one who thinks these guys just wanted to, keep the meth for themselves, right? I mean, I'm sure it didn't help to have Samantha constantly reassuring them that she was an actress. Guys, I'm not even kidding. She told them not to worry about the police. She could handle them because she's an actress. I really can't even, I thought I lived in a fantasy world, but, holy shit. Okay, so you're probably thinking this can't get any worse, right? I mean, we're discussing a woman who took her children to a drug deal while planning to kill the only father they've ever known. I mean, after all, but yeah, no, it totally does. It gets worse. Did you think it was odd all 5 children managed to sleep through the home invasion and a kidnapping? Well, that's because they had a little help from Mommy's Ambien. That's right. This woman drugged her children. Once they were passed out, she tucked them away in the room farthest from her own. Another nail in her coffin was how 3 men entered the home. During the initial planning phase, in a brief moment of hesitation, Jonathan had told Samantha all she had to do was leave the door unlocked if she wanted their help. And that's exactly what she did. That night, those 3 men walked into that house with absolutely no resistance. And the most heartbreaking part of it all, aside from the 5 children who were essentially left orphans, were some of Ernie's last words. This man was ripped from his bed by 3 strangers in the middle of the night. His fear and his confusion are incomprehensible. We'll never be able to fully fathom the terror that he experienced as he was beaten in front of his wife, knowing only a few thin walls separated them from his children. He could have only expected the worst as he watched another man pin his wife to the ground, and he begged them not to hurt her. Even after they put him in the car and drove away, she remained his priority. The man who already wanted a divorce still couldn't bear the thought of something happening to the mother of his children. You know, it's a real fucking shame that his feelings weren't mutual. So, they drove to a remote forest in the next county and walked deep into the woods where Jose shot Ernie. The original plan was for Octavius to cut his throat, but for whatever reason that seemed to be taking too long, so Jose just did the job himself. Once the body was recovered, Jonathan and Jose pled guilty to aggravated kidnapping and first-degree murder, each receiving a 50-year sentence in April of 2016. Octavius went to trial that December, and although he did not plead guilty, he received a combined sentence of 98 years for both crimes. Samantha didn't go to trial until September of 2017. And she maintained her innocence by continuing to blame the medication for her actions. You'll be pleased to hear that the jury wasn't buying any of that. And after an exceptionally short deliberation, she was found blissfully guilty. She received 50 years for the kidnapping alone, and a second trial for Ernie's murder would earn her an additional 99 years. Needless to say, she's going to be in prison for the rest of her natural life. Even if she were somehow able to get paroled on the kidnapping charge, only then would the murder sentence begin. There's no way out for her. And honestly, that's exactly how it should be. Oh, hey, it's almost like she got sent off to live on her own colony after all. Oh man, I love when these things come full circle. I bet you probably think this is the end of her story, that she's sitting in a cell rotting somewhere in silent shame. But you'd be wrong. And not just because she's incapable of shame. Tell me, have you ever heard of jailbabes.com? It's a site for female inmates to communicate with the outside world. Kind of like a Tinder for convicts. I took the liberty of checking out her profile, and it doesn't seem like prison had any effect on her personality. You know what? Here, let me give you a little taste. There's never a dull moment with me. I'm a caffeine-addicted Mormon who just loves to laugh and enjoy life to the fullest. I love to meet new people. It's always quite interesting getting to know people from all walks of life, so never think we'll be ill-matched. I'm not judgmental. I have a passion for anime, manga, cosplay. Ooh, wait, hold on. You know, it got too ridiculous. Let me skip the list of her likes and tell you how it ends, because this is too much. All right, are you ready?
I work hard so I can play harder. Write me so we can play together. You won't be disappointed.
Oh my god, I can't believe I said that with a straight face. Anywho, she can't actually talk online or reply to the emails, but if you include your home address, she can respond by letter. Though something tells me she only responds to those who utilize the donate button, so I don't know. Just maybe be aware of that. I'm not encouraging you to interact with her. In fact, I really hope you don't, but, you know, hey, I'm not your fucking mom either. Well, guys, if you only take away one thing from this, make it that Ernie Ibarra was a good man and father who deserves to be remembered as such, for his sake and for his kids. Meeting Samantha Wohlford was the single worst mistake of his life, and it's honestly heartbreaking that that mistake happened to be fatal. Right down to his last breath, the man was still trying to protect his wife and kids. So, well, as much as I hate to bring us out of our cozy darkness, I'm afraid that's it for tonight. Don't worry, you'll get your next fix soon enough. And by the way, Darksiders, don't do anything I wouldn't do, huh? Welcome back, Darksiders. This week, we're here for a very solemn subject. One I don't want to summarize with an introduction. Those familiar with EDP445 won't need one. And those who aren't are gonna know soon enough. Some lessons are too heavy to convey with fancy words and somber music. They must be felt to appreciate their weight. So, take a moment to collect yourselves. And when you're ready, we'll dive into what may be our most disturbing case yet. EDP was born Bryant Turhan Emerson Moreland on December 15th, 1990. And the uninitiated are probably wondering what EDP stands for, if not his initials. It means, eat dat pussy. The numbers were random, though. Many like to joke that it was his weight. He was only 19 when he chose it, and his first logo was a Pac-Man eating a cat. Which, honestly, is kind of funny, a little weird, but a little bit funny. Unfortunately, there isn't much information out there about the early life of EDP. He was an only child raised by a single mother, and her death in 2015 was a very difficult time for him. Though he was born in LA, most of his YouTube career would take place while he lived in Bakersfield, California. He created his very first YouTube channel on June 13th of 2010. And though he started with a freestyle rap video, he would go on to prove himself an Eagles football superfan, a gun collector, gamer, and much, much more. But his shameless rants and honest opinions are what facilitated his rise to popularity with the younger crowds. People found him hilarious. He didn't censor his words for anyone or anything. When he spoke, every other word would be fuck or the F word, that other F word. But that would get tedious to repeat in our deep dive, so I'm going to be toning those things down quite a bit. His first time to talk about football wouldn't be until that November when the Eagles beat the Redskins. But it was the channel's main topic from that point forward. As his audience grew, so did his empire. On September 17, 2012, he started the last type of channel that you'd ever expect, given his regular content. Cooking. He called it Chaotic Kitchen 445, and it's still on YouTube today with 24 videos and just under 12,000 subscribers. It doesn't seem to get much attention, but I definitely thought it was kind of an interesting find. On January 22nd, 2013, he started a gaming channel called EDP Gaming 1, and it's also still available, with 138 videos and almost 80,000 subscribers, though its fate was to also be forgotten. I don't know how else they would have survived the Great Purge. That October, he started a fourth channel with an underscore in his name for vlogging, which actually survived until just a couple months ago in June, but it never saw the traffic of his main channel. Now this guy would go where no one else would. One of his most popular early skits involved him sitting on a toilet and discussing how much he loved Chipotle, but what a terrible price he paid for eating it. He shamelessly ranted in great detail about demolishing his toilet while he was still sitting on it. The audience was shocked, horrified, disgusted, and hooked. I mean, what was this guy gonna do next, you know? Times were changing, though, and 2017 was the first time EDP got in trouble for his content. YouTube only banned him for 2 weeks, but Twitter banned him permanently when his excessive use of hateful slurs finally caught up to him. A few years later, he started EDP445 2.0 as a sort of backup, but it was shut down the same day as his main channel. In early 2020, EDP finally passed the 1 million milestone, but YouTube refused to send him a play button, stating that the channel didn't meet their eligibility criteria. A few other YouTubers reached out in solidarity, and he had a fan-made button, but never an official one. June of 2020 would be when one of his most well-known videos would emerge. It was titled, "Almost Threw Hands with a 13-year-old." EDP is wearing a security guard uniform and talking about a horrible shit he had to take, which you'll find is one of his favorite topics. When he finishes, he hears something loud outside, goes to see what's up, and finds some rowdy kids throwing a football around in the front of the store. Worried they'll crack a car's windshield or get run over, EDP asks them to move along nicely, even though he was still dropping F-bombs with every other word. But one of the teens responded with a prominent, quote, "Fuck you, fat ass." While pissed, EDP was maintaining a semblance of control until the boy insulted his mother. So, obviously, the offer was made to, quote, "throw hands" despite the kid's age. But that's when the boy's girlfriend comes out of the store, so they leave. As they go, the teen looks back and says, quote, "You just saved yourself an ass whooping." At this point, EDP goes into a couple of meltdowns and reiterates the weight difference between the combatants. The entire video is only his ranting to the camera, but the anger a child was able to inspire in him had everybody reacting to it. Little did EDP know, the first of his allegations were only a few months away. Allegations nobody suspected or wanted to believe. Allegations that would be swept aside more times than any other YouTubers, simply because fans were so desperate not to believe them. I know it's been hard to hear about children being preyed on, but just because it's hard to hear does not mean that it isn't happening every single fucking day. The better educated we are on the subject, the greater chance we have of understanding and identifying dangerous situations in our own lives. Because you truly never know who is capable of these things. The first instance wasn't enough for people to believe this lovable, if extremely crude, goofball was capable of harming a child. Around June of 2020, a few people began accusing EDP of sending sexual texts to minors, but they were largely ignored until a guy called Cold Raven came into the picture. He began collecting the accusations and making videos about them, while one of his followers actually created a catfish account to go after the big man himself. And he caught him saying extremely explicit things. There are also screenshots of EDP threatening the decoy not to post his messages, but despite the evidence, most fans wanted to believe he knew it wasn't a minor. Cold Raven would get 2 response videos. The first one was only EDP calling him a nobody and saying everyone could talk shit over the computer, but no one had the balls to approach him in person. The second one was actually worse. Instead of denying the accusation, he simply ate wings and waved his gun around. Yeah, pretty big and bad, right? Being accused of something so terrible was bad enough, but the way he chose to respond only made things worse. The one that seemed to piss people off the most was a picture of EDP holding a friend's toddler. She wasn't wearing anything above the waist, and he captioned it, quote, "You can run, but you can't hide. Boom, captured you." Disgusting, honestly. He even stopped streaming when a fan called him out in a super chat saying that they were all waiting to hear his side of the story. Other times, he simply called any fan who questioned him a troll and then thanked them for paying his bills. There was also an incident where a teen tried to get his girlfriend, Lucy, a cameo for her birthday, but EDP asked him for nude pictures of her instead. You'll be surprised to learn we do actually know EDP's side on this one in particular. According to him, the guy didn't have a way to pay for it. So EDP tells him, quote, "Man, that's some bullshit, dude. You're gonna have to show some ass or tits or something." And that's when the boyfriend said Lucy was only 15. And then all contact ceased. Supposedly, anyway. I mean, I genuinely do not know, but I am simply giving you both sides. Now, we finally made it to the big one. The one that erases all possible doubt. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about the people who exposed him. It starts with the owner of a now deleted channel called Predator Poachers, who went by Chet Goldstein. His real name is Alex Rosen, and that is what we will be calling him. Now, most of you probably know about Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator, and that several people have copied this idea. Predator Poachers was one of them. Now, they pretend to be children on social media in order to catch sick individuals that they then confront in real life. I actually found a Fox 13 Seattle News report saying they exposed a teacher for trying to exchange pictures with a young boy. Despite how much people trash him, including me, or, how well it's deserved, I really don't want to overlook the good he helped bring about. When predators find their way into a position of power over children, like teaching, the possibilities are unspeakable. I'm genuinely grateful that they managed to expose the people that they did. Their first channel had over 100,000 subscribers when it was shut down for policy violations, but they started a new channel for the EDP operation. Of course, it's also YouTube policy that one cannot simply start a new channel after being banned, so the second one didn't make it very long, but it got the exposure videos up long enough for others to spread the word. Oh, and I do want to note that while Predator Poachers is a team of people, this is mostly about Alex. I'll get the smaller issue out of the way first. Many have a problem with how he conducted the interview of EDP, which we'll cover a little more extensively later, but also that he actually delayed the release of the exposure video until he could be certain it was fully monetized. When you're preaching the importance of putting away predators, you probably shouldn't be holding the information hostage for profit. But that is barely the tip of the iceberg. Now, I know this is going to sound bogus, but bear with me, okay? In April of 2021, a YouTuber named Archwizard CJ posted a series of live stream clips accumulated by a Twitter user called Camel Jockey. Yeah, I know. That proved Alex can be quite the bad man himself. I mean, it's made abundantly clear if you listen to him talk for any extended period, but I'm talking about blatant racism and bigotry. Alex uses the N-word and the F-word freely while making racist jokes on multiple streams. And there's a clip of him approaching a random woman in Walmart where he starts making jokes about a little girl locked in his basement, which honestly, I still don't understand it. Why? The look on his face when instructing a decoy how to pose for pictures is extremely nauseating. He tells her to take her shirt off and stick her tongue out, but when she sounds clearly uncomfortable and confused by the request, he explains it's because, quote, predators ask for all kinds of weird stuff. Oh, yeah, they sure do, don't they, Alex? That's probably why he doesn't mind using actual minors for some of the decoy pics. One was a cameraman's cousin, and only 16. He met the other, a 17-year-old boy, while playing Madden on PS4. But I want to discuss the most serious allegation for a second. They said he uses actual nudes of minors when catching predators, and technically, yes, he does, but my problem is how they cut the video clip and stated this. They want to make it sound like he's admitting to multiple children's photos, but this clip is clearly cut to start in the middle of a sentence, which is always honestly a pretty big red flag. I mean, it feels like he's referring to a picture of his own, Willie, that he took in high school. Obviously, that's still illegal and wrong as hell, and I am absolutely not defending him by any means, but that, I'm not gonna try to make it into something even worse, especially when he goes on to show how he sat on the toilet to take the picture across the board. Really disgusting, not my business, but hey, facts are facts, I'm here to present them. So, now that you know everyone involved, let's talk about the setup. These guys built a relationship with EDP over a 2-month period before arranging to meet in person. And it all started with one simple Instagram message. On February 23rd, 2021, while pretending to be a 14-year-old girl named Sophie, they DM'd a simple compliment. And EDP took it from there. But since they initiated first contact, they have already made an argument for entrapment and hurt the case from a legal standpoint. They just don't know it yet. Before beginning the actual chats, I want to start with a small disclaimer. While these types of schemes typically do expose predators, they are very dangerous and rarely end in convictions. In the vast majority of cases, a DA will actually refuse to become involved when they're too heavily tainted by amateur investigators. Also, there were 2 women playing the part of the young girl. One actually said she was 13, and that is the age he remembered. But you'll also hear her say 14 as we go through the story. Don't let that throw you off, okay? So keep that in mind. In order to make a believable Instagram, they used an app to make the real girl's face look younger, and it worked pretty well. I mean, from what I understand of the pictures that were seen, it absolutely looks like a 12 to 14-year-old. Nobody could mistake that picture for being that of an adult. EDP was 100% convinced he was speaking with a child from the very first message. They rarely said more than, "Hey, what's up?" in the beginning, aside from a few short yet vulgar chats about guns and food. I think it's fair to say the vast majority of adults wouldn't have spoken to a random child even in that way, but there was nothing overtly inappropriate until the following day when he sent her a picture of his shit. No, I mean actual, fecal matter, as in he took a shit, stood up, snapped a picture of what was left in the toilet, and sent it. If this were the story of 2 adults getting to know each other, it would still be incredibly disturbing. But the fact that he believes that he's talking to a 13-year-old is really off the charts. To make matters worse, it was, completely random. I imagine most of you were thinking, what the hell were they talking about that led him to do that? Right? Yes, that's what I'm saying. See, well, on the night of February 25th, EDP says, "What's up? What you doing?" Well, Sophie says the typical, "Nothing much," reply, and all is silent for the next hour. Until suddenly, with no prompt whatsoever, he says, "Dropped a mean-ass shit," with a picture to prove it. I mean, who does that? Who does that? Oh my God. Just don't forget the real purpose of the conversation. She can't react negatively, so EDP gets the really big laugh that he expected, right? Ew, but still. By the second week of March, they had spoken over the phone a few times and made sure his awareness of her age was confirmed in the chat. She specifically says, "I don't know if I told you, I'm 14. Obviously he knew, but it's very important for the police to get that part in writing. Instead of taking the opportunity to extract himself from the situation, EDP reassures her they're just chatting. With hard evidence he's aware of her age, she exchanges a few more basic pleasantries before casually mentioning she also lives in Bakersfield. Pleased with the revelation, EDP's first response is guessing her high school, which, whether he was just making a conversation or intentionally baiting her, is a common tactic among predators. And they'll say something like, "Let me guess, you go to," or "Let me guess, you live at," and insert the name of a school or neighborhood. They don't expect to get it right, but most of the time, people will fill in the blank themselves when answering. In this case, the girl's information's fake, so it doesn't really matter that she gave him the name of another school. But please be aware of this when you are speaking with strangers. This tactic is not solely used on children. Remember that, and be safe. They eventually moved the chat to text now, where EDP was quickly growing much bolder. And this time, when he asked, "What are you doing?" he responds with, "Just got done beating my shit, LMFAO." Now, to avoid any backpedaling later, Sophie clarifies, "Oh, like jacking off?" And yeah, I mean, he meant exactly that. I'll give him one thing. It was a lot better than a shit pic. I mean, not by much, but, it's definitely the lesser evil, especially for those of us unfortunate enough to actually, have researched the topic. Both are disgusting. End of story. When planning a time to chat, EDP mentions he has a stream that night, and Sophie asks if he's going to shout her out, by which he says, "Oh, she's too young to be on the stream," which almost sounds responsible, right? but he only said no to avoid arousing suspicion. Remember, he already had plenty of accusation under his belt. Even a shout-out would have been damning. Not that it mattered, considering how things ended, but, still. Aside from trying to schedule video chats, things stay fairly mundane until mid-March, when Sophie asks EDP what his intentions are. He says he only wants to be friends. But when she asks if he likes her as anything more, he gives a little ground saying, not enough to go to jail over. Though his fear of jail does nothing to end the conversation, and the subject soon transitions to squishy hugs and cuddles. Ugh. Sophie uses the momentum to discuss when or where they might meet, and EDP eventually agrees the park could be a possibility. They would have another video chat shortly after where this idea is discussed again, and afterwards, Sophie returns the chat, asking which park they'd use. This scares EDP enough to make him block her, which erases the chat history. It's actually standard practice for these guys to quickly unblock the children they're chatting up. Their texts get a lot more flirty after this until he finally breaks, saying, "I can't wait to kiss you and give you a quick nibble." Sophie asks if he would want to do more than kiss, and obviously, he does, but she needs him to say it. She doesn't have to press very hard before he agrees that yes, if she wants to, they can have sex. I'm sure he felt like a great guy when reassuring her they'd never do anything she didn't want to do. God, it's just disgusting. Now, as we move forward, we will see moments of, let's call it, clarity from EDP. He tries to back out of the situation a few times, but the decoy is always able to pull him back in, though admittedly with very little effort. Some people become angered by this, saying that they should have left EDP alone at that point, instead of pulling him back in while he is trying to resist these urges. That's fine. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, is entitled to their own opinion, but I would ask you to consider this. Countless young girls speak to their idols this way, and many will push even harder than this decoy. They are kids. They don't know any better or understand what they are actually getting into. It is the adult's job to be responsible, especially if you're a public figure. I would like to think that the vast majority of men wouldn't have taken the conversation this far in the first place. But even if they had, simply leaving her blocked would have ended the situation just fine. So, with that out of the way, EDP then assures Sophie they would take it slow. He would teach her how things work, and when she got comfy, things could move along. He's always the gentlemanly groomer, completely supportive and never pressuring, blah, blah, blah. Ugh. She responds in a positive way, but immediately afterwards, EDP changes his mind, saying, "We can be friends, but I can't do this shit. This is something I have to live with for the rest of my life." Sophie is very understanding, of course, and EDP elaborates his reasons for backing out. He isn't concerned for any moral implications, simply that if anybody were to find out, he would go to jail and lose everything. Regardless, this moment of clarity didn't even last a full day. Their conversations would start innocently enough the next morning, but soon revert back to the previous night's topic. He reiterates how much he likes her, but he's afraid others will find out. Then, after Sophie calls him adorable, he's ready to, quote, teach her again. When asked, "Teach me what?" he confirms what we talked about last night. Sophie says she doesn't want to scare him off again, but he reassures her the previous night was his fault for reacting that way. And then he really goes for it, fully convinced that this is a 13-year-old girl. He asks if she would want to have sex to experience it firsthand. I guess because he's such a nice, innocent guy, he wanted to pretend that's not what the implication was, like, "Oh, hey, why don't we just fucking come on, man?" The next part was almost too much. Sophie continues playing dumb, asking if sex hurts, and so on, and EDP explains they can take things very slow, not do anything she's uncomfortable with, and suggests oral, since he loves doing what his YouTube name suggests. From here, he greatly increases the compliments and promises to be exclusive, blah, 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 but it always leads to how he can't wait to hug and kiss her. Though Sophie doesn't need to push very hard before he expands on those desires. He said he wanted to lick her from head to toe. Apparently he loves the toes too, but he doesn't stop there. Things continue to get more graphic as Sophie pretends to be ignorant about sex and asks for clarification on just about everything. His explanation of why sex hurt the first time was painfully graphic. I wish I could say that that was the worst of it, but it's really not. He constantly reassures her how special she is, how much he cares, how everything is fully under her control. Because that is the kind of stuff that groomers do. For what it's worth, he also mentioned he enjoys role-playing. The first example he gave her was a scenario called Daddy's Little Girl, which honestly, I feel pretty much speaks for itself at this point. By now, it's the end of March, and EDP isn't shy about sharing his feelings anymore. He becomes more sexual as each day passes, and often refers to her as his little baby girl or princess. Of course, that's nothing compared to when he jokes he wants to climb through her window, kiss her, quote, cute ass passionately, handcuff her, throw her into the back of his car, and take her back to his dungeon. Yeah. Now, I'm sure this was his fantasy, and, everyone loves to pretend he was being literal, but with this guy's overall behavior? No, I don't believe he actually intended to do that at all. I mean, listen, to be clear, I am absolutely not defending the guy. I know he would have done something he construed as consensual, but I also believe that his actions are reprehensible enough that we don't need to stoke the flames with those kinds of cheap shots. We care about the facts, and that is fact. The fact is, it was extremely easy to bait this guy. Think of it this way. It wasn't his first time. He took steps to hide his bad behavior. His actions escalated as he grew more comfortable. And despite suspecting a setup on multiple occasions, he kept coming back. These are classic addict moves. He quite literally cannot help himself. He needs to see a professional for any hope of controlling these urges. But honestly, that doesn't seem like an option he cares to pursue. He sends his first dick pic after telling her that he's jerking off while thinking about their first time, and she asks if she can see. Again, this is something that happens to influencers often. No person in their right mind actually sends such a picture to a minor, asked or not. The decoy asking for this picture does not absolve EDP. The internet is dangerous enough without predatory YouTubers, and as a fellow YouTuber, I gotta say, these guys are giving us a real shit reputation. From here on, there's no more small talk of guns or movies. It is 100% sexting. Sophie, as we've called her, mostly says, "That's hot," or asks what something means. The decoy never reciprocates anything sexual. But EDP becomes increasingly graphic. There is no line he failed to cross. He even sent her pornographic videos and pictures of his semen. Assuming they have enough evidence, Sophie takes the next "I'd love to see you" comment as an opening to invite him to a swimming pool. But he says he can't go to her, or, quote, "silly people will talk." He must have gotten scared again because he doesn't talk for give or take about 3 days. And when he does come back, he said he had gone away to handle some stuff and had a lot on his mind. Wonder what that could have been. To further prove he ran from paranoia, after apologizing, he immediately asks Sophie if she's saving their conversations. I bet that gave the decoy a chuckle. But obviously she denied it and then asked why someone would do such a thing. Of course, EDP can't tell the truth, so he reverts to his default of calling other people dumbasses. It makes him feel better, though, and he goes right back to saying inappropriate things, such as, quote, "I know your body is growing and developing. That's why I agreed to this. I want to be your first, little cute ass." God, this is nauseating to read. Moving into the second week of April, EDP begins introducing Sophie to sex toys. Again, via pictures, probably due to his excitement over learning she lives across town from him. It's common for these predator chasers to use random apartment complexes for safe places to meet because it eliminates any chance of them knocking on someone's front door. I know we spent a lot of time on the chat, and you guys are probably ready to hear about the actual confrontation. I promise, we're almost there. But in case there's anyone still sympathizing with EDP in this scenario, I'm gonna give you a direct quote. He told Sophie it was a secret, and she had to promise not to tell. Quote, I always wanted to get to know someone young and a little cute like yourself. Someone who wasn't afraid to show an interest in me even though our age gap is so big. Do you see what I mean? This could easily have been a real child instead of a decoy. We could be listening to an entirely different story right now. One we have seen all too often play out a million times over. When this took place, he had over 2 million subscribers. There are plenty of women who would have thrown themselves at him for that fact alone. The night before they finally meet, EDP is very clearly nervous. He confirms the mother and grandmother will definitely be gone several times over before changing the conversation back to sex and sending a screenshot of the dirty movie he was watching. They only stop talking when a friend interrupts him in real life. And the next day, he has one last moment of clarity. Those seem to happen after the nights he talks about jerking off. Imagine that. Once again, he's only concerned with going to jail and losing his channel. But don't you worry. Sophie doesn't let him get away that easily. She shows him the chocolate cupcake she spent all morning baking and doesn't want her heart broken.
Can't he at least get a cupcake?
She finally convinces him to come over after a phone call, but not before he sends one more message. And I think this one you also need to hear word for word. Quote, I don't mean to scare you or anything, but I swear on my life if this shit's a setup or some backdoor troll shit or if the police are waiting, it won't be pretty. So, like I promised you, I'll come. You gotta promise me this shit isn't a damn setup. If something goes wrong here, my ass is on the line. You know the best part? She doesn't respond or even answer right away. She waits. And then says, can't talk right now, Grandma's still here. Just to ensure he doesn't try to back out again. She brings out the big guns and apologizes for getting upset by saying, quote, my dad broke his pinky promises and I thought you had too. I know nothing about this situation is funny, but I mean, I did have to chuckle a little bit at that one, to be honest. Okay, all right. Are you guys ready for the big confrontation? It was 50 minutes long, and I found it on a channel called The Goat Bros. It starts with Alex and a friend confronting EDP at the apartment complex. I never caught the friend's name, but I've come to call him Curly. After Alex asks EDP if he is armed, he admits to the trap right away. We were Sophie the whole time, so if you want this to go well, I suggest you come have a talk. Now, some of you probably think EDP reacted angrily. Maybe he had a gun after all. Maybe he ran for it. Maybe he cried. But he did none of those things. He was friendly, docile, and agreed without hesitation. They walked a short distance where what is probably the worst interview ever begins. And I'm not trying to throw an extra jab at Alex. That is the opinion among the majority who see it, including the YouTubers who have made reaction videos on it like Penguin0. Instead of asking actual journalistic questions, he berates EDP and makes a show of insulting his weight, which has absolutely nothing to do with this situation. The few real questions he does ask are yelled repeatedly throughout the video for shock factor. But the important thing is this: they erased any doubts remaining as to EDP's innocence. Why there was any left after so many previous incidences, I mean, I don't quite understand, but we're just gonna focus on the win here, yeah. After having EDP admit Sophie's age and the fact that their chats involve sexual content, he asks the big question. What brings you out here today? And do you know what Mr. Agreeable said? still being very friendly and nonchalant. He said he was just coming to get a cupcake. There was nothing sexual about it, except for the messages, obviously, But it's not like that. Then why did he do it? Why did he start the conversation with a 13-year-old to begin with? Why does he fantasize about being with a younger girl? Because he was lonely, of course. But Curly is quick to point out that a guy with 2 million subs is gonna have an inbox full of girls trying to hit him up. Though, I suppose they weren't young enough to match his fantasy. When EDP stands by his claim for this only being his second incident, he's asked about the previous one, but he simply says it was with a 15-year-old who DM'd him first and blames his celebrity status. Alex lets the subject of the first victim fall to ask if EDP would have spoken to a 12-year-old the same way. But that is where he claims to draw the line. There are predators who have preferred types, and they generally do stay within their age range, but that's not to say that he wouldn't have simply waited for her birthday. Plus, he lies several times throughout the interview, and it's obviously the best answer he can give under the circumstances, so I can't even begin to guess if he's telling the truth there. Considering it's only a minute or two later when he admits to there being 6 incidents instead of 2, I highly doubt the few names he muttered were real. But they briefly discuss a few incidences, and EDP's main defense is that he would never actually flown to where these girls were located. Okay. They also ask if he believes he should go to jail, and though he later changes his answer to no, he does say yes the first time. This leads to another one of Alex's weird rants, but Curly brings us back on track by asking if EDP ever sought therapy for his issues, and when the answer is no, asks why he hasn't. I mean, it's not like he can't afford it, right? Now, until this point, the guys have been careful with their wording when referring to EDP's fate. They would say things like, "when you go home after this," or "if we called the cops," to make him compliant. And it worked. Because each of these statements are reinforcing what EDP has been praying for. That these guys are only trolls looking for 15 minutes of fame. He's hoping if he gives them what they want, he'll be spared the extra footage of being placed in handcuffs. Well, sure, it seems obvious to us that the police must be the endgame, but our minds can convince us of almost anything when desperate enough. Each time EDP gritted his teeth and answered another allegation, he was focused on the moment that he could get in his car and simply drive away. Of course, EDP can't say much aside from begging them not to involve the police and offering to set up a therapy appointment while they watch. Obviously, none of them work, but he gives it the good old college try. And sadly, there's no argument for the facts of this case. The vast majority of EDP's audience consists of high school students, and that's an extremely dangerous situation. We genuinely have no clue how many girls there really are or how far things actually went. All I do know is that statistically speaking, it's very unlikely he's been caught in every single instance. And if being caught wasn't a strong enough deterrent to sway his impulse before, I doubt this incident was either. In my opinion, he won't be able to quit without professional help. Over 25 minutes into this interrogation, EDP can't take the suspense and asks if his life is over. But Alex and Curly say it's up to him, that he can either crawl in a hole and hide, or he gets help. But I assure you, EDP only heard, "So no, we aren't calling the police." He decides to go for broke and he lays it all out. He understands that they have all the evidence. He understands what he did wrong. And what he wants to do now is go get help. While EDP is being especially compliant, Alex begins asking why he blocked Sophie on multiple occasions throughout their chatting history, but he wouldn't admit why. Well, he was actually in the process of trying to create a feasible answer, but Alex interrupts him to switch topics again. But I'm trying to give you guys a real clear summary here. They switch from EDP's texts to Sophie, to what he thinks would happen to him in prison, and then back again in practically the same sentence. All the while, EDP is still steadily agreeing, still convinced there's a chance that no police will be called. When the "what happens next time" question comes, he swears there's not going to be one. This time was different. This time scared him straight. Honestly, I'm a little surprised and kind of disappointed that he didn't, try for a pinky promise here. With the pictures EDP sent and the fact that he drove to the apartment specifically to meet with a minor, they figure there are 3 good charges to call the police about. But Alex becomes sidetracked with his unrelated opinions yet again. After forcing EDP to admit he fantasized about being dominated by a 13-year-old, he clarifies, quote, "Even if she was 18, being dominated by a female, that's weird in itself. Now take that down to middle school, and it's criminally weird." Which, yeah, no shit. Any sexual act taken down to middle school is fucking criminal. That's why we're here, my guy. Maybe being dominated isn't everybody's cup of tea, but it certainly doesn't qualify as cringy. I feel like a woman must have really kicked his ass at some point. Maybe in his childhood or something, but that's only a personal guess because honestly, I just really happen to enjoy psychology. One sensible thing they do say, amidst repeating the most shocking chats, is that EDP should be on the registry. And that is absolutely true. They also try to have him call the cops on himself to explain what he's done and why he's there, but obviously that wasn't going to happen. Alex then dials the police and taunts EDP with the phone, asking repeatedly, "What's stopping me from pressing the green button?" Of course, he has to shout over EDP, who is still begging them not to call, and Curly, who is ranting about the dungeon fantasy. When Alex actually gets on the phone with the police department, EDP begins to walk away, and Curly follows him, still repeating the same questions and telling him how sick he is as Alex trails behind. It becomes apparent the dispatcher is questioning the call's validity, and I think that's when EDP decides he's going to get out of there. In a very calm manner, he brings out his phone, scrolls through it, and begins making a call. My first thought was he must be calling a friend for a ride or advice, or, maybe he just must want to lay somewhere low. But Curly begins to panic, repeatedly hollering that he's calling a friend. Then Alex, in a more concerned tone, tells the dispatcher, "Please hurry, I think he's calling for backup." I swear to you, there was nothing in this that gave that impression. Alex seems to be transferred to another dispatcher, and this one takes EDP's information. But Alex grows increasingly frustrated when they don't send help fast enough. As EDP approaches his car, they back off, and the video ends with the guys agreeing to give police the evidence at the apartments. So, what happened in the days to come? Was EDP arrested? Unfortunately, he wasn't. But thanks to Sunny V2, I can tell you what came next. A few days later, he privatized all of his uploads and lost 200,000 subscribers over the next week. Not that it mattered since, YouTube deleted his entire channel on April 27th. The video of his confrontation spreads like wildfire. And there was nowhere to hide. Another OG YouTuber was gone, and EDP was one of the last unfiltered channels who didn't allow ad revenue to dictate content. He'd been making those videos for over 10 years. He's never done really anything else, and then suddenly he's thrown into the real world. You would think he had enough money saved up to buy himself a little time, but it sounds like he ran out fairly quick. The next several months were nothing but a series of karmatic failures. People emailed Cameo by the hundreds, informing them of the allegations. And in less than a week, they banned him as well. He turned to Facebook and Instagram next, but wasn't long before they kicked him out too. Though he may have lasted a little longer on Facebook had he not made a video about Alex Rosen. He calls him out for using racial slurs and having no credibility, but it drew a lot of attention towards his own accusations. Next, he tried to start his own website. But according to a Reddit thread, he had a falling out with his developer. Eventually, people gave up hope when still receiving an error code months after the original launch date. There was also a second YouTube channel called The Notorious EDP, but it too was very short-lived. With that failure under his belt, he pushed forward onto another website that I've never heard of, called 3Speak. But they banned him too. He tried to argue against it, saying he hadn't broken any guidelines and he didn't understand why it happened, but come on, man, like he knows, we all know. Bruh. So this is where things get a little interesting in a different way. Normally this would pretty much be where the story ended, you know? Thus he disappeared and no one ever heard from him again. But EDP has the problem of being extremely recognizable. He moved all the way to Henderson, Nevada to start over, but that wasn't going to be good enough. In October, he found work as a Lyft driver, but was fired when a user called Lenin Jimenez shared his profile on TikTok after a ride. The same scenario happened during a short time at Grubhub and Uber Eats. No matter where he went, somebody seemed to recognize him. There's also a rumor going around that he applied for Chuck E. Cheese. But I have a hard time believing he would be that stupid. I think somebody just appreciated the humor factor, but I mean, honestly, I could be wrong. I don't know. On October 21st, he applied to have his name changed to Dion Scott Wilson Eason, but was only met with more ridicule when the name spread across Reddit. Without plastic surgery, he doesn't stand a chance of disappearing. According to Master at Work, someone who had been working to expose EDP since 2020, he had less than $3,300 left, plus any guns or assets that he might be able to sell. In the following months, Reddit users would learn he did eventually sell one of his cars, along with being evicted from his apartment complex, though not because he didn't pay the bill. Apparently, they were just receiving too many complaints about him living there. I mean, hell, to be fair, they probably did him a favor kicking him out before he spent even more on rent that he couldn't afford. I'm gonna assume he hadn't chosen a cheap place to live, considering the lifestyle that he was accustomed to. From there, he began making the rounds through hotel after hotel, which was probably even more expensive than the apartment, and his haters still tried to find him. They wanted him behind bars. And, short of that, they wanted him as miserable as possible. Maybe some were holding out hope that he'd decide to turn himself in after all. Throughout all of this, several people would make various claims of EDP having been arrested, but each time it would prove to be bogus. On December 3rd, a former friend, Philippe, claimed he received a phone call from a Henderson, Nevada detention facility, and it was on behalf of inmate Bryant Moreland. Taken by surprise, Philippe hangs up, but the number calls right back, and the same scenario plays out. Only this time, he accepts the charges. His only form of evidence is a call log screenshot showing 4 no-caller IDs, but that wouldn't be difficult to make up either. Then there's the fact that this guy used the name Bryant after EDP was believed to have changed his name, and a comment where someone claims to have checked every inmate record in those surrounding counties. But there was nobody by that name. I normally wouldn't take the word of a random comment, but given the other evidence we have and how horribly obsessed people were with this particular topic, I have no doubt more than one person took the time to check the records. And honestly, somebody would have found it. Moving into this year, EDP found his way back onto Instagram just long enough to address Philippe by asking him to pay back the $1,000 bail money he owes instead of spreading lies. While EDP's numbers were nothing compared to what they once were, he gained over 20,000 followers before the account was banned again. What? Surely you didn't expect him to keep it. There was also a TikTok account going viral just after the Super Bowl, but EDP would later hear of this and announce that it wasn't him. This would prompt people to look closer and discover they were actually re-uploads of his old Instagram posts. But seeing how well they did, EDP started a genuine TikTok account, the OG EDP. He made basically the same content as what he did when he was on YouTube, talking about anything he wanted to while saying fuck at least 4 times per sentence. Oh, and his comments are disabled for, obvious reasons. This is around the time he found a site called Bigo Live, where he could stream videos, but they mostly consisted of people calling in to confront him or trolling the chats. While Bigo didn't seem to ban him, he did stop uploading, which led Redditors to assume that they had deactivated his streaming ability without banning the account. Believe it or not, he did get his website up and running in April. I checked it while researching it. says you can order custom shoutouts, buy merch, view his live streams, and more. But the menu only has 2 other options besides the homepage: catalog and contact. Fun fact, the catalog is just the homepage without the banner at the top. Since April, there doesn't seem to be anything else to report, but don't you worry. We'll be keeping an eye on the situation, and you can expect an update if anything changes. And that, my friends, is the story of EDP445. Most of his later YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram videos can be found re-uploaded to YouTube, but the Internet Archive has over 180 hours of his earlier content, if you're interested. Otherwise, it's once again time we emerge from the darkness and return to our normal lives. Or you can just go watch some other twisted shit, that's fine too. I'm not here to judge. Either way, I'll be back next week with something even more heinous. For now, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Good evening, Darksiders. Thank you for joining us on our pilot episode. I promise you won't be disappointed. Tell me, do you believe in fate? Because Randy Stair did. And tonight, we're putting his life under a microscope as we break down hours of disturbing content. The parts detailing his plans for mass murder wouldn't be posted until minutes before the crime occurred. But there were still quite a few warning signs. Some will make you cringe, and some will make you scream. But we watched every minute of his madness, so you wouldn't have to. Now, grab some snacks and your favorite vice, as together, we descend into the darkness. Randy was born on September 17, 1992, and grew up in Dallas, Pennsylvania, with his parents and younger brother, Jeremy. They lived in a nice home with a big yard and were well-liked in the community. Essentially, they were the very definition of an average middle-class family. He was intelligent, had a few friends, but he preferred spending time alone. While he was normally shy and quiet, he could be quick to anger and irrational when he was upset. Few of us enjoyed going to school. Even fewer hated it like Randy. He often cried when being dropped off and refused to participate in class. Though, considering school is basically a job for children where teachers are the bosses, this isn't surprising. Much of Randy's time was spent watching television, and when he discovered the Nickelodeon cartoon Danny Phantom at 13, he became obsessed. In the show, a teenager named Danny Fenton has an accident with a ghost zone portal, which gives him an array of ghostly superpowers. But it wasn't the main character he identified with. It was Ember McLean, a semi-villainous dead rocker chick who hates authority and craves attention. He felt an instant connection. At his first glance of her, he immediately felt warm inside. She was familiar, like they had met before. As we continue moving through Randy's life, just be aware Ember is there, always in the background. Because she's so intertwined with his life, and because he contradicts himself fairly regularly, it's hard to get the timeline exactly right, but we'll be coming back to her often. He always held an interest in death and the afterlife. At a young age, he began fantasizing about dying in a plane crash. It would be instant, and allow him to die in flames, just like his idol, Ember. The subject eventually found its way into school papers, and his assignments would feature several, if not all, of his characters dying in various gruesome ways. But to his great dismay, he was never confronted about these creative decisions. While vast amounts of time were spent speculating what happens after we die, perhaps an equal amount was spent on sheer disbelief. No one even noticed. I think it's fair to say he was outright offended. As much as the topic of death fascinated him, it didn't consume his thoughts until his brother's friend, Tom, crashed into a tree on the way to school in 2012. He wasn't close with the boy himself, but simply knowing someone who died, let alone someone younger, left him obsessing over the details. He wanted to know exactly how it happened. The cause of death, how fast he was going, if he died on the scene or at the hospital. On and on and on. It's surprising he had the presence of mind not to ask, but he did begin visiting the crash site each year on the accident's anniversary. To make matters worse, a college classmate was also killed in a wreck that same year, and they had been friends. Matt died in December during the holiday break, and the accident occurred close enough to Weiss Supermarket for Randy's coworkers to discuss it. He became aware that a student from the same college had died, but not that it was his friend. He wouldn't find that out until the following semester when a teacher pulled him aside. An entry in his journal sums up his experience as well. Quote, "Tom's death sucked the life out of me, but Matt's death killed me." His grandfather also passed away that year, and shortly after, Randy and Jeremy totaled their vehicles only weeks apart from one another. Though neither were seriously injured, it rattled Randy to his core and deepened his obsession with death. He constantly thought of aging and becoming disgusted with old people, ultimately deciding it would be pointless to live to 30. His depression continued to worsen. He often came straight home after school to spend his evenings alone, watching television or YouTube, and eventually, he discovered a hidden talent. Randy drew stacks of fan art dedicated to Ember McLean, and soon, he was drawing himself, or rather, his true self, into the pictures as Andrew Blaze, who was also female. In addition to making himself a character, he ultimately designed several other girls, all with their own backgrounds, personalities, and social media accounts, but more on those later. For now, there's a lot to cover just to understand the fantasy itself. It developed over years, but you're about to get a crash course of the finished results. These girls are essentially emo musicians from the Ghost Zone who want to invade our dimension and enslave the human race. Obviously, Ember is their leader, but there isn't much to their chain of command. Randy's main focus seems to have been character development rather than storyline progression. And there are 3 characters he favored. Rachel Selensky spent her time at Westboro High as a quiet outcast with only one real friend, Andrew Blaze, who was 2 years older and graduated in 2011. By September of 2014, Rachel was so fed up with school and bullies, she and Andrew began planning a massacre. After killing everyone at Westboro High, the county would be next, followed by the world itself. They began seeing themselves as literal goddesses, and they were fully aware they would join Ember's ghost squad at the time of their deaths. This plot in particular will become very important later. Arguably, the most important character is Mackenzie West. She's shy and reserved on the outside, but has an evil demon on the inside, which made her life fairly miserable. She was plagued by supernatural events when alone and furious. No one believed her. One of the few things she enjoyed was playing basketball, until she saw her first ghost during an away game and ran off the court. This resulted in her being kidnapped and assaulted by a man in black, and it was especially horrific. The play-by-play is available on Wiki, but eventually the assailant cut her throat. When she finally died, she was recruited to the Ghost Squad, and perhaps most importantly, she is Andrew Blaze's soulmate. It's important you understand this became far more than a fantasy to Randy. At some point, he stopped thinking of it as creating and started thinking of it as remembering. He genuinely thought Mackenzie was speaking to him. And this is the culmination of what she's been saying, that he is in fact part of the Ghost Squad and merely trapped inside some guy's, meat sack. Death was the only thing that could free his animated female self and allow him to rejoin his soulmate. I know this is a hornet's nest story worth of crazy, but I still can't help wondering why he would kill his soulmate off with brutal torture. None of his characters have pleasant deaths, but most are suicides or school shootings. They don't come close to the level of suffering that Mackenzie endured. Maybe there's a psychological need for his partner to be even more emotionally damaged than himself. And that's how far he had to take it in order to get her there. Who knows? Actually, there's a lot of things he believed that don't really fit into this timeline or story. But I kind of want to tell you a couple anyway, purely because of how, wild they are. For one thing, members of the Ghost Squad have always been among us. When there are mysterious deaths or disappearances, that's the squad's recruiters at work. For anyone under 40, that is. Apparently that's the cutoff point, I guess. I think we're really seeing Randy's hatred for old people coming out in this one. My personal favorite is what happens when we die. Obviously, Andrew will rejoin the Ghost Squad and wreak havoc on our mortal plane. But what about the rest of us? According to Randy, it's whatever the hell we believe will happen. That's right, kids. You want to be a Pokemon Master? A Super Saiyan? Because you can be, so dream big. Also, I would like to clarify I only use his preferred pronouns. Randy essentially saw himself as two separate entities. His physical human form was Randy Stair, male, and his soul, whom he truly believed on the inside and who he would be again after death, was Andrew Blaze, female. It's also probably worth mentioning he never dated anyone and, in fact, did die a virgin. Over time, he found various ways to make himself feel more feminine. When home alone, he would take the opportunity to borrow clothes from his mother's closet. And this was usually on Wednesday nights when the rest of his family went bowling. In a message to his parents, he says he did want a sex change, but aside from fearing a botched surgery, he ultimately concluded that he wouldn't be him anymore. He felt he was put on this earth in that body for a reason. Plain and simple. He also developed this habit of shaving his entire body every 3 days, but the most extreme attempt to change his appearance came in the form of body paint. Overall, Randy wasn't a fan, but he wanted to be as white as ember, so he covered himself in what was essentially liquid latex. It became glued to his skin, and he was forced to peel it off in little pieces. Best of all, he apparently forgot to shave beforehand because the bits stuck in his body hair were a particular nightmare to remove. It also left a huge white stain in his bedroom carpet. For someone who put decent effort into hiding his feminine hobbies, he was oddly disappointed by his success. As he became more comfortable with these habits, he grew less cautious and behaved as if he wanted to get caught. It was little things at first. Instead of hiding his Venus razor in a desk drawer, he started leaving it on the bathroom counter. He also casually replaced the word God with goddess in his everyday speech. But these things went unnoticed. A fact that annoyed the piss out of him. Actually, there are several rants that focus on the sheer disbelief. No one spotted his trail of warning signs. It makes me wonder what would have happened if even one person confronted him before that fateful night. But sadly, that's something we'll never know. By now, you're probably wondering why someone who was so clearly troubled did not get help. Someone who was never able to imagine his own future or envision himself with a career or family. But I can only offer you the same answer Randy gave. he didn't want any. He felt medication would have turned him into someone else, and he had no interest in therapy, especially since he knew that it wouldn't cure him, for lack of a better word. He believed everything was happening exactly as it was destined to happen, and absolutely nothing was going to change it. Many argue his parents should have forced him into therapy, but we don't really know their side of the story, and I hesitate to pass judgment based solely on Randy's assessment of their character. Though he loved his father growing up, that began to change in high school. The first seeds of hatred were planted when Robert gave his son a part-time job at the grocery store he managed, Weiss Supermarket. Randy was not happy about being forced to work, and his resentment grew to the point of hating all men in general. He found their behavior and anatomy repulsive. This may very well be when he became homophobic. He was shamelessly outspoken in his hatred for the gay community, likely due to how often he was mistaken as gay. The one full-time job he managed to attain on his own was for a hospital. He quit his job at Weiss in order to become a materials manager, and it was his responsibility to maintain the storage closets. The entire first day consisted of training videos where they taught him the various hospital codes and what his responsibilities would be. Basically the typical orientation you would expect when starting any new job. He was expected to memorize the locations of multiple storage closets and their entry codes, along with being responsible for maintaining their inventory. Essentially, he would be the one stocking the supplies and distributing them when needed. It was a struggle, but somehow he managed to soldier through the whole day. But he couldn't bring himself to return. Afterwards, he emailed the man who hired him to say thank you for the opportunity, but he declined the position. His official reason, and what he told his parents, was, quote, "That's just not the job for me." Needless to say, that conversation did not go over smoothly. Obviously, this increased the strain between father and son. With Randy now in college, Robert's strong encouragement to find a job quickly evolved to incessant nagging, and the two were barely able to be in the same house. Robert wanted his son to work full-time and move out, but Randy, quite frankly, didn't want to and wasn't gonna. He knew there was no point, that he would be dead by then. But he couldn't exactly say that to his father. Ultimately, his mother, Lorianne, would be the one to speak with another manager at Weiss to learn that her son was still in the system and ask for his job back. While infuriated at the time, Randy would later go on to call this a blessing in disguise, though I'm sure Lorianne looks back on it as something quite the opposite. YouTube career. Now that you know a bit about Randy in general, let's talk about his YouTube career. Making videos was one of the few things that genuinely made him happy. On June 9th of 2008, while Randy was still in high school, he created his first channel, Pioneer Productions. Obviously, it's since been removed, but some of the footage was re-uploaded. He started off by streaming various games and creating comedy skits with a stuffed horsehead on a stick that he named Mr. Horsehead. As he became more comfortable with recording, he also added a stuffed whale and a toy frog named Whale and Froggy. For an artist, he was weirdly uncreative when it came to names. One episode in particular gained significant attention when the popular YouTuber Ray William Johnson actually featured a skit with Mr. Horsehead and an alligator. Millions saw it, and Randy got a taste of the life he'd been chasing all this time. By 2010, he completed his dream of becoming an official YouTube partner and made a video thanking his fans. It's one of the few uploads where we actually see him genuinely happy. Little did he know, this would be a relatively short-lived success. But before he started losing viewers, he created a second channel. Worthless Toaster was dedicated to finding the song Remember by none other than Ember McLean. Well, the actress that voiced her, but it was featured on a Danny Phantom soundtrack from 2004. Randy was sick of hearing his staticky bootleg version. He wanted to hear an HD copy. And in 2014, he got it. Ironically enough, the reason he couldn't find it was because the artist's name was spelled wrong in the cartoon's credits. But it had been posted to Robin Kermes's website all along. Randy made his own video for the music, and its success gave him new hope for living. It's still on YouTube today, with over 4 million views in the last 8 years. This was also the year he posted his first truly dark video. It was 4 minutes long, and the plot revolved around Randy having amnesia after a box fell onto his head. He's then tied up and assaulted by a whale, while Froggy records everything and threatens to post it online. This is where we begin to see his viewership decline, and it only gets darker from there. Once his suicide plans were complete, he decided to write an end to Whale and Froggy's story too. He filmed a skit where both were taken hostage, and he taped Froggy to the floor while brutally murdering Whale. He put real effort into this. He filmed multiple scenes, used fake blood, and the characters begged for mercy as they were being tortured. When Whale is dead, Randy retrieves Froggy and lets him see the body of his mutilated friend before his own turn begins. All the while, Froggy is screaming, begging for his life, and asking, why? We do get one small, satisfying taste of karma with this video. In the process of making it, Randy stabbed his own finger. It was a serious wound, and it required multiple surgeries. As a result, that finger was left with a slight bend. Though, considering this is what led to Randy being on the night shift, perhaps it's not the best example for karma. He would ultimately take this as a sign of fate for his actions. Also, the surgeries meant he had the extra free time he had always needed to give his fantasies extra structure. Hence, Amber's Ghost Squad, the animated series, was born. And Randy began making cartoons instead of comedy skits. In January 2016, Pioneer Productions was officially renamed EGS Productions. He drew the artwork in the same style as the Danny Phantom cartoon, while hiring voice actors and animators for the rest. There were also several extremely disturbing audio recordings of different characters documenting their thoughts and feelings before joining the Ghost Squad, as a way of establishing their backstories. But the series would never take off the way he hoped. At the time of its removal, it had barely over 13,000 subscribers. For a kid who started off doing comedy skits, those aren't terrible numbers. It collected over 1 million views. But Randy wanted so much more. He did acquire a small following who seemed to enjoy his extra dark EGS content. Each character would end up with their own Twitter accounts where they would interact with one another and give voice to their creator's deepest thoughts. People were viewing it as a form of art, not someone's genuine opinions. And this made Randy bolder in what he posted. And he continued pushing the boundaries, looking for people's limits. But he never received the shocked response that he wanted. Well, this is also when he would begin working on what he considered to be his masterpiece, the Westboro High Massacre. Creating this was one of the most, if not the most, important goals to Randy. He created the artwork while hiring voice actors and animators for the rest, but everyone he tried to work with quit upon reading the script. Understandably, no one wanted to be involved with a school shooting story that glorified the shooters. As a result, he recorded long, angry rants about how it made him feel insignificant, and was forced to finish the video on his own. This is when he would dive into a second obsession that would have an even larger impact on the course of events. He became completely enamored by the Columbine Massacre of 1999, the event where 2 high school students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, killed a teacher and 12 classmates before committing suicide. Randy idolized these 2 and discussed them frequently on camera and in his journals. He describes them as good kids who were bullied, but deep down inside they were victims. Honestly, if we knew nothing else about Randy before this point, his opinions about Columbine would probably be enough. He especially identified with Eric, believing they endured the same struggles and had similar outlooks. Though considering Harris was an army brat who had difficulties adjusting to new schools, and Randy lived in the same town and same house for his entire life, I, personally, don't see the parallels. Even their daddy issues were different. It's also worth noting that he thought that they may have known each other in the Ghost Squad before this current life. He isn't positive, but it's possible. The way he talks about the teen killers with such admiration is both haunting and nauseating. He made it his mission to learn every single detail about that horrific event. On the day of the Columbine shooting, Eric wore a white t-shirt with black text reading, "Natural Selection." So, of course, Randy bought 3. He would be astounded each time he wore one without being confronted, and behaved as if those who didn't understand the reference were idiots, especially his parents. Since it involved a topic their son was passionate about, he felt they should have at least recognized the shirt. All of these different factors would combine to ultimately lead Randy to one conclusion. He wanted to die. And several months would go into meticulously planning exactly how he wanted to go. The biggest question after a tragedy is always, why? Why did it happen? Why did they do it? This is one of the questions Randy answered for his family. And while his answers may want to make us reach through time and bitch slap him, they are his reasons. First and foremost, Ember told him to. The Ghost Squad always needs more souls. Then, there was the fact that he hated life in general and had strong desires to kill people. And finally, there was his obsession with Columbine and wanting to emulate his heroes. He talked at length about his mother taking him to buy a shotgun and then going behind her back to buy a second one. The two are identical except for the second being a couple of inches shorter. And again, in imitation of Columbine, he named his weapons. And he gives full credit to Eric Harris for inspiring him to duct tape the gun grips. The longer one is Mackenzie. The shorter one is Rachel. You guessed it, named after his EGS characters. In the numerous videos where he practices shooting, it is painfully obvious that he had no prior experience. He received a lot of mockery for these. Aside from terrible aim, he had significant trouble dealing with the recoil. Hence the duct tape. His videos were bright neon warning signs for anyone willing to listen. But sadly, nobody did. One of the reasons his case is so popular among the true crime community is simply thanks to the sheer abundance of the material left behind. He knew people would think he threw his life away, but he saw it as finally returning to his true life. On April 25th, 2017, Randy uploaded one of his most infamous videos titled, Fate by Coin Flip. Do you remember when I asked you if you believed in fate? This is why. It's 8 minutes long and shot in a single take. There are no cuts, because Randy didn't want there to be any doubt to its authenticity. He begins by showing the camera a 1983 quarter and asks, "Do you believe in fate?" Then he explains the stakes of his coin toss. A best 2 out of 3 flip. If it's heads, he'd kill himself at home. If it's tails, he would kill himself at the grocery store, along with all of his coworkers. Considering he not only got the result he wanted, but that it also took the full 3 dramatic coin tosses, many still believe the video's fake. Randy is clearly enjoying himself for the duration of the film, and it's not hard to imagine him filming the scene multiple times until achieving the desired results. Could 3 deaths actually have been prevented by the flip of a coin? Or were they doomed no matter what? This is one of those things that we'll never know for certain. It's also widely questioned if a home suicide would have resulted in the death of his family, but in my personal opinion, I don't believe it would have. In this video that he recorded specifically for his parents, He says he could have easily killed them before driving to the store, but he wanted them, quote, to suffer, and suffer hard. Honestly, he's most likely correct. It almost certainly wouldn't have altered the course of events. But I believe he took great pleasure in imagining his family's reactions, and their deaths would have ruined that fantasy. He wanted them to be outcasts in their own community, to live with the shame of knowing what their son really was. Plus, Randy clearly considered life to be a worse punishment than death. Although, through all of his rants, it becomes clear that part of him still cares about his mom. While he openly despises Robert on a passionate, outspoken level, he noticeably softens when it comes to Lorianne. While he could be utterly heartless towards those he felt wronged by, there were times he almost showed compassion towards others. Not enough to cancel his plans, mind you, but when he spoke of a coworker who was also a war vet, he felt the man had been through enough and wanted to minimize his suffering by killing him as quickly as possible. On June 5th, he posted updates to his social media saying, quote, "I'm so ready to die. 2 more fun nights and that's it. I've officially accepted that Wednesday night will be the death of me. Everything around me seems to have faded away. The last week has felt as if I'm the last soul on this planet. I see people, but they feel like an illusion. I've never felt so distant from society, and I love it." Now, if that isn't a giant parade of red flags, I don't know what is, but his post, unsurprisingly, went largely unnoticed. Now, fast forward a bit and it's time for the big night. It starts on June 7th, and he had a strict schedule to follow. The attack was originally planned for September 7th because of a reference in the song Remember, but he didn't want to live that much longer, and his chances of being caught were only increasing with each moment that passed. He gets to work at 10:52 p.m. and begins his work as usual. There are 3 other people in the building: Victoria Brown, Brian Hayes, and Terry Lee Sterling. The emergency exit next to the manager's office was the first to be blocked. 2 minutes after midnight, he began tweeting his character's farewell messages. The first was sent from Mackenzie's. Quote, "I wish you could have all gotten to know her like I do, but that's the way it's gotta be. I'm sorry, Earth, but we all need to go now. Andrew Blaze was a great person to talk to and be around, and she always tried her best, even when she knew it wouldn't end the way she wanted. To all the loving, caring, beautiful people in the world, I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. I robbed you of an angel. Things happen for a reason, good or bad, but I'm so sorry things have to end like this. I speak for all of us when I say that. I hope we're able to get you through the day. I always hate goodbyes, but it's more like, see you later. Thank you, Mackenzie." Of course, since this message was coming from a fictional character's Twitter account, nobody took it seriously. Then, at 12:09 a.m., he published the unfinished works of Westboro High Massacre, with a wall of text in the intro condemning those who bailed on him and praising the fans who would appreciate what he did with the amount of time that he had. You can probably understand why people stopped responding once they saw the script, but not Randy. He probably would have killed a few of the voice actors if they had been in his proximity. In the end, he used crudely drawn images and home video footage to fill in the gaps. As in, 1 second you're seeing bloody carnage, and the next it cuts to a picture of Randy posing with a shotgun, smiling. There was also a tour of the supermarket so viewers could see exactly where the real-life carnage was going to take place. He even filmed the exits with descriptions of how he would block them off and the amount of time it would take, and what it would buy him. It also included references to Fred Phelps, the leader of Westboro Baptist Church, and described the Columbine shooters as heroes. In total, the video was 42 minutes long and, obviously, has since been removed. At 12:10, he released a series of files and videos titled Journal Suicide Tapes. This is the content explaining his, quote, true identity, and why he's committed these heinous crimes. 1 minute later, he tweeted, "Goodbye, humans, I'll miss you. from the Andrew Blaze account. If there's one thing Eaton Township didn't have to wait for, it was answers. At 12:37, he went to his car and texted his mother the location of his journals, instructions for how to handle his remains, and to remove his computer's hard drives before selling it. Then he blocks the bakery's emergency exit with his car and puts on black eyeliner and lipstick, again, to appear more like Ember. Randy discarded his red work shirt to reveal a white one reading, "It's our time to rise," and removed his weapons from the back seat. At 12:41, he goes back inside via the main entrance and blocks it. He then shoots 26-year-old Victoria Brong twice in the back. Kristen Newell was nearby listening to headphones, but still heard the gunshots. Turning to Victoria, she tried to ask what the noise was when she noticed her friend lying on the ground. That's when she turned to see Randy with the shotgun pointed right at her. They maintained eye contact for several seconds before Randy simply moved on. Many have speculated on why he didn't kill her, but we'll never know if it was because of the eye contact and it made it too real, or if he simply liked her. But his other victims, with the exception of the one he loathed the most, were all shot from behind. Kristen hid between cash registers while Randy proceeded to the bakery, where he shot Terry Sterling, also twice in the back. Though the store's surveillance footage will never be released, the transcripts state Randy stood behind each victim for a very significant period of time before he fired. At 12:44, Kristen was able to escape after bypassing the pallets blocking the main entrance. While hiding behind a bush, she called 911, but she could still hear gunshots as she waited for the police to arrive. Brian Hayes, the main target, was shot 5 times before Randy attempted to blow up the store by shooting the propane tanks. Unfortunately for him, they aren't quite as explosive as the movies make them out to be. When this failed, he had to settle for shooting himself. And that's exactly what he did. Police found all 3 victims and the shooter dead on arrival. When officers searched the Stair home, they confiscated Randy's journals, drawings, and hard drives. It seems he didn't consider this possibility when leaving his mother instructions. His artwork was the only thing he showed any concern for leaving behind. He left explicit instructions on how they should be handled, and wanted them to go to a fan that he would believe would have appreciated them. He believed his family would find them a loving home. And I'm disappointed that we won't get to see what they would have done if left to their own devices. There's only one thing I'm sure about. If ghosts are real, in any sense of the word, and Randy was able to become one, he's not pleased with his legacy. For hours, he ranted about the reactions he would expect from family and fans. He genuinely thought someone would continue EGS. As hard as it is to believe, many psychopaths do end up with some kind of fan base, but if Randy has any, I couldn't find him. There are people who feel sorry for him, since he clearly suffered from an untreated mental illness for most of his life, but fangirls? No, nope, none of those. None that are publicly outspoken, at least. The best way to end this video may be with Randy's own words. The journal he began in November of 2016 is easily found online, and written inside the cover is a very simple passage to all readers. I believe it sums up who he was perfectly. I have no regrets for what I may do or what I have done. I am who I am, and no fucking human shit can take that away from me. I'm an EGS recruit. You're worthless fucking humans. One day, you'll all see things my way. Especially when our ghost squad invades your pathetic, putrid planet and you become our slaves for the rest of your lives. I will not stop. I will not change. I will not cower. I will fight for the squad and do what I've set out to do. I am Andrew fucking Blaze. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this ride as much as I did. And if you're still hungry for more, several hours of Randy's original recordings have been re-uploaded to a YouTube channel named Mon Julius. Plus, the good folks at Explore With Us and Coffee House Crime have terrific breakdowns. We'll leave you some links in the description. Now, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss our next episode. And I'll be seeing you very soon. Good night, Darksiders. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.